Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto was the reincarnation of the vampire king Alucard. And get married with Seras Integra, Hellsing. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Chapter 1. Crimson Awakening. The mist clung to the ancient pines like spectral fingers, transforming the forest into a labyrinth of shadow and vapor. Naruto Uzumaki moved through this ethereal landscape with preternatural silence, each footfall precisely placed despite the treacherous terrain beneath. 17 years had transformed the once brash academy student into something else entirely. A Jonin whose reputation had begun to eclipse even that of his legendary father. His blue eyes, normally bright with mischief, had hardened to the color of tempered steel as he scanned the surroundings. 3 chakra signatures pulsed behind him, his team, maintaining perfect formation despite the oppressive fog that reduced visibility to mere yards. The 4th signature he'd expected to sense remained conspicuously absent. Kenta should have reported back 20 minutes ago, Naruto whispered, his voice barely disturbing the heavy silence. The words emerged as faint puffs of condensation in the chill night air. Something's wrong. Beside him, Hiro Yamada adjusted his glasses with a precise finger. Perhaps he's simply maintaining radio silence. The mission parameters. No, Naruto's interruption was soft but absolute. He wouldn't miss a check-in unless something happened. The 3rd member of their team, Takumi, a stocky chunin with burn scars covering his left arm, shifted uncomfortably. The mission brief mentioned nothing about hostiles in this region. The temple's supposed to be abandoned. Since when has supposed to be ever meant anything in our line of work? Naruto replied, a ghost of his old grin flickering across his features before vanishing back into the mask of professional detachment he'd cultivated over years of increasingly difficult missions. T had begun as a routine reconnaissance assignment to investigate reports of unusual chakra signatures emanating from an abandoned temple in the hinterlands between the Land of Fire and the Land of Wa. Terror was rapidly transforming into something far more complex. The mist itself felt wrong somehow. Not the natural weather pattern of the region, nor even the chakra-infused Kurigakure no jutsu favored by water country shinobi. This mist seemed to pulse with a rhythm that reminded Naruto of a heartbeat. His own heartbeat suddenly thundered in his ears, accompanied by a strange, hollow sensation in his stomach. Not fear. He'd long since learned to harness fear, to transform it into heightened awareness rather than paralysis, but something deeper, more primal. Like hunger, but not for food. Something's watching us, he murmured, the hairs on the back of his neck rising. The moment the words left his lips, a piercing scream shattered the silence, a sound so filled with terror and agony that it barely seemed human. The chakra signature that flared with the cry was unmistakable. Kenta, Takumi hissed. Formation Sigma, Naruto ordered crisply. Hiro, sensory perimeter. Takumi, defensive support. All take point. The cry had originated from somewhere deeper in the mist-shrouded forest, in the direction of their original objective, the abandoned temple that dated back to before the founding of the hidden villages. Without waiting for acknowledgement from his team, Naruto launched himself forward, chakra pulsing through his legs as he bounded from tree branch to tree branch with uncanny precision. The scream had already faded, replaced by a silence more oppressive than before. No birds called, no insects chirped, even the wind had died, leaving the mist hanging motionless between the trees like a funeral shroud. As he moved, Naruto's senses stretched outward, seeking any trace of his missing teammate. What he found instead sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the damp night air. Where Kenta's chakra signature should have been, there was instead a strange absence. Not the empty void left by death. Naruto had felt that too many times not to recognize it, but something different, as if the very life energy that should have been there had been somehow consumed. When Naruto finally reached the clearing where Kenta's last signal had originated, the sight that greeted him defied immediate comprehension. The young chunin lay sprawled across a bed of fallen leaves, his skin ashen white in the dim moonlight that filtered through the canopy and mist. But it was the absolute stillness of his form that registered first. No rise and fall of his chest, no flicker of movement beneath his eyelids. And the blood, so much blood, pooling beneath his body, soaking into the earth. Yet it was the wound that drew Naruto's complete attention. 2 perfect puncture marks on Kenta's neck, surrounded by bruising that resembled a mouth. "What the hell?" he whispered, dropping to one knee beside the body. His fingers reached for the carotid artery, searching for a pulse he already knew wouldn't be there. The scent hit him then. Copper and salt, but something more. Something that made his own pulse quicken and his mouth suddenly run dry with hunger. The bizarre reaction to his teammate's death confused and revolted him simultaneously. "Captain," Hiro's voice came from behind, tight with controlled emotion. "We're not alone." Naruto rose in a fluid motion, kunai already in hand. "How many?" "I count 6 distinct signatures," Hiro replied, his fingers forming a complex seal as he extended his sensory jutsu. "But they're strange, fluctuating, almost as if they're not entirely human," a new voice finished, smooth and cultured. Emerging from the mist to their left, the figure that materialized seemed to coalesce from the mist itself, a tall, pale man with aristocratic features and eyes that gleamed with an unnatural crimson light. His long black coat hung to his ankles, unmarked by any village insignia or identifying marks. "What an unexpected pleasure," the stranger continued, his voice carrying the faint accent of water country aristocracy. "When my associates detected unusual chakra in our territory, we hardly expected to encounter the famous Naruto Uzumaki." Naruto shifted his weight imperceptibly, readying himself for combat while keeping his expression neutral. "This region falls under the Joint Protection Treaty between Konoha and Kurigakure. Identify yourself." A smile curved the stranger's lips, revealing teeth that seemed just slightly too sharp. "Treaties with human villages mean little to those of us who preceded their founding. But where are my manners? You may call me Lord Valerian." The title carried no meaning to Naruto, but the dismissive reference to human villages sent warning signals cascading through his mind. Behind him, he could feel Takumi and Hiro tensing, chakra gathering as they prepared defensive jutsu. "Did you kill my teammate?" Naruto asked bluntly, his blue eyes hardening as he gestured toward Kenta's body. Lord Valerian's gaze flickered to the corpse with casual disinterest. "Not personally, no. One of my more impetuous retainers, I'm afraid. The young ones have so little self-control when hungry." His crimson eyes returned to Naruto, studying him with unsettling intensity. "But what fascinates me is why you're here, specifically. Something drew you to this temple. Something in your blood, perhaps." The strange hunger Naruto had felt earlier returned, stronger now, accompanied by a throbbing behind his eyes. The sensation was foreign yet somehow familiar, like a half-forgotten dream. "We're here under orders to investigate chakra anomalies," Naruto stated flatly, refusing to be drawn into whatever game this stranger was playing. "Nothing more." "Orders." Valerian chuckled, the sound entirely devoid of warmth. "Always following orders. How very human. And yet." His head tilted slightly, nostrils flaring as if catching a scent. "There's something else beneath the surface, isn't there? Something ancient. Something powerful." The mist around them began to thicken, swirling with purpose as 5 more figures emerged, arranging themselves in a loose circle around the Konoha shinobi. Each newcomer shared the same natural pallor and predatory grace as their apparent leader, though their clothing ranged from antiquated formal wear to more practical modern attire. "I don't suppose you'd consider simply leaving," Naruto said conversationally, even as his mind raced through tactical options. The strange chakra these individuals emitted felt wrong, not like the demonic energy of the 9 tails he'd grown accustomed to, but something else entirely. Something that felt paradoxically dead yet intensely alive. "Leave? When we've only just met?" Valerian's smile widened. "I think not. You see, your arrival is most fortuitous. This temple has considerable significance to my kind. The fact that you were drawn here suggests certain possibilities that I find intriguing." "Whatever game you're playing ends now," Naruto replied, his patience evaporating. "We're taking our teammate's body and leaving. Stand aside." A ripple of amusement passed through the circle of pale figures. "Such confidence," Valerian remarked. "But I fear you misunderstand your position. You are not leaving until we determine exactly what you are, Naruto Uzumaki." The threat hung in the air for a heartbeat before Naruto moved, his hands forming seals with blinding speed. Wind style. Vacuum blade. The compressed air blade sliced through the mist toward Valerian, who simply wasn't there when it arrived. The jutsu continued unimpeded, cleaving through a massive pine tree behind where the pale man had stood. Impressive speed. Valerian's voice came from directly behind Naruto. But predictable. Naruto pivoted, already forming another set of seals. But the pale man's hand shot out with impossible velocity, closing around his throat and lifting him from the ground with inhuman strength. Now then, Valerian purred. Let's have a closer look at what's hiding behind those human eyes of yours. Behind them, chaos erupted as Hiro and Takumi engaged the other pale figures. The forest filled with the sounds of sea, combat, the distinctive crackle of lightning as Takumi deployed his lightning-style jutsu, the subtle humming of Hiro's chakra barriers. But Naruto's focus narrowed to the crimson eyes boring into his own. The pressure around his throat should have been cutting off his air, yet the panic he expected didn't materialize. Instead, that strange hunger returned tenfold, accompanied by a burning sensat. Ion spreading through his veins like liquid fire. There it is, Valerian whispered, his expression shifting from amusement to something approaching reverence. The power awakens. But how can this be? After all these centuries, Naruto's vision blurred, the world taking on a reddish tinge as something primal and ancient stirred within him, something separate from the Nine Tails, whose chakra remained dormant. This was different, older, hungrier. What did you do to me? Naruto managed to rasp out, his fingers clawing uselessly at the iron grip around his throat. I've done nothing but provide the catalyst. Valerian replied, fascination evident in his voice. The blood recognizes blood. The night calls to night. You carry the legacy of our greatest king within you, though how this came to be, I cannot fathom. The burning sensation intensified, centering in Naruto's chest before exploding outward through every cell. His canine teeth suddenly ached, lengthening painfully in his mouth. The hunger became overwhelming, a desperate need that clawed at his insides with razor-sharp talons. Let me go. The words emerged as a guttural roar that barely sounded human. Darkness erupted from Naruto's body, not the corrosive red chakra of the Nine Tails, but something deeper and more ancient. Living shadows that formed tendrils around him, whipping through the air with deadly purpose. One such tendril pierced straight through Valerian's shoulder, forcing the pale man to release his grip with a shocked gasp. Naruto dropped to the forest floor, landing in a predatory crew. That felt both alien and instinctively right. The hunger now dominated his consciousness, accompanied by an overwhelming thirst that parched his throat. The scent of blood, Kenta's spilled blood, the fresh blood now seeping from Valerian's wound, filled his nostrils with intoxicating potency. Impossible, Valerian breathed, clutching his wounded shoulder. For the first time, fear flashed across his aristocratic features. The shadow manipulation, the crimson eyes. You cannot be him. He was destroyed centuries ago. Naruto barely registered the words, his consciousness splitting between the tactician who had led countless successful missions and something else. Something that viewed the pale figures surrounding him not as enemies to be defeated but as prey to be consumed. Who is it you think I am? Naruto demanded, his voice roughened by the transformation taking place within him. The shadows continued to writhe around his form, responding to emotions he couldn't name. Valerian took a step backward, a gesture to his companions that halted their assault on Naruto's teammates. The greatest of our kind. The no-life king. The dragon. Alucard. The name triggered a cascade of images in Naruto's mind, flashes of battles fought centuries ago, of castles and dungeons, of scientific laboratories and occult rituals. Of a woman with platinum blonde hair and steely blue eyes behind circular glasses, issuing commands with absolute authority. Of another woman, younger, with blonde hair and bright blue eyes, fierce and loyal. I don't know what you're talking about, Naruto growled. Even as another part of him whispered, liar. You've always known something was different. The healing that was too rapid to explain. The nightmares of battles you never fought. The bloodlue, saint during combat that went beyond adrenaline. Valerian's expression transformed from fear to calculation. Then you truly don't know. A smile spread across his face, revealing elongated canines. How fascinating. The great Alucard, reborn without knowledge of his true nature. What a delicious opportunity this presents. Captain, Takumi's voice cut through the haze of confusion and hunger. We need to move. Heroes down. The tactical part of Naruto's mind reasserted control momentarily. A quick glance confirmed Takumi's report. Hiro lay unconscious at the edge of the clearing, blood seeping from a wound similar to the one on Kenta's neck. But unlike Kenta, Hiro's chest still rose and fell with shallow breaths. Yes, attend to your fallen comrades, Valerian said, making a dismissive gesture. We'll have plenty of time to continue this discussion later. The awakening has begun, and it cannot be reversed. When the hunger becomes unbearable, and it will, you'll seek us out. I'm not letting you leave. Naruto snarled, the shadows around him intensifying. You misunderstand the situation, Valerian replied calmly. We're not leaving. We're simply giving you time to process your new reality. The temple awaits you, after all, the place of your rebirth. Before Naruto could respond, the mist thickened dramatically, swirling around the pale figures until they disappeared entirely. Within moments, their chakra signatures had vanished as well, leaving only Naruto and his team in the clearing with their dead comrade. The sudden absence of threat allowed the burning hunger to recede slightly. Though it remained a persistent ache beneath Naruto's consciousness, the shadow tendrils gradually retracted into his body, leaving him feeling drained yet somehow more powerful than before. Captain. Takumi approached cautiously, his expression caught between concern and wariness. Your eyes. Naruto blinked, confused. What about them? They're red, like the Sharingan, but different. And your teeth. Naruto ran his tongue over his canines, finding them elongated into points sharp enough to cut his own tongue. The taste of his blood sent another wave of that strange hunger coursing through him. We need to get Hiro medical attention, Naruto said, deliberately changing the subject. And bring Kenta's body back to the village. Takumi nodded, though his eyes never left Naruto's transformed features. What about the mission? The temple. Naruto turned his gaze toward the direction the mist had been thickest, where ancient stone walls were just barely visible through the trees. Something called to him from that place, something that promised answers to questions he hadn't even known to ask. I'm going to continue alone, he decided. Take Hiro and Kenta back to the rendezvous point. If I'm not back by dawn, return to Konoha and report directly to the Hokage. With all due respect, Captain, splitting up after what just happened seems like a tactical error, Takumi argued. His scarred hand clenching nervously at his side. It's not a tactical decision, Naruto admitted. It's a necessity. Whatever's happening to me, I need answers, and I think they're in that temple. Besides, he hesitated, not wanting to vocalize the darkest thought circling his mind. If I lose control completely, better that I'm far from the village. Takumi studied him for a long moment before nodding reluctantly. You have until dawn, then I'm coming after you, orders or not. Fair enough, Naruto agreed, already turning toward the temple. Just make sure Hiro gets medical attention first. That bite, it's doing something to his chakra system. As Takumi gathered their injured and fallen comrades, Naruto forced himself to walk, not run, toward the ancient structure that seemed to pulse with significance in his newly awakened senses. Each step felt like moving against a powerful current, his body simultaneously drawn toward and repelled by whatever awaited him. The temple itself proved to be older and more extensive than the mission briefing had indicated. What had appeared from a distance to be a simple shrine expanded into a sprawling complex built into the side of a mountain, its architecture predating the founding of the hidden villages by centuries, perhaps millennia. Stone steps, worn by time and elements, led up to a massive entrance flanked by weathered statues. In the moonlight filtering through the mist, Naruto could make out the forms of wolves or large dogs, their stone eyes seeming to follow his approach with ancient vigilance. As he ascended the steps, the hunger intensified again, accompanied by whispers at the edge of his consciousness, voices speaking in languages he shouldn't understand but somehow did. Romanian, English, German, languages from a world far removed from the 5 great nations. What's happening to me? He muttered, pausing to steady himself against one of the stone guardians. The moan. His palm made contact with the cold stone, visions flooded his mind. A castle perched on a mountain in a distant land. A dungeon beneath a mansion in London. A battlefield littered with impaled bodies. A young woman with blonde hair drinking his blood, transforming, becoming something more than human. A ship on a storm-tossed sea. A man in a wide-brimmed hat and red coat, laughing maniacally. A.S. bullets tore through his body only for the wounds to heal instantly. Naruto jerked his hand away, gasping. The visions receded but left impressions behind, knowledge that couldn't possibly be his yet somehow was. The temple entrance loomed before him, a gaping maw of darkness that promised either revelation or damnation. Perhaps both. Naruto formed a simple hand sign, channeling chakra to create a small flame in his palm for illumination, a basic jutsu taught to all Konoha shinobi for night operations. What the light revealed stopped him in his tracks. The interior walls were covered in elaborate murals and inscriptions. The artistic style unlike anything from the Five Nations. But it was the central figure depicted in the largest mural that captured his complete attention, a tall M. And in medieval armor and flowing red cape, with eyes the color of blood and elongated canines visible in his triumphant smile. Around him, armies fell before shadows that seemed to emerge from his very being. Beneath this imposing figure, an inscription in an ancient script somehow translated itself in Naruto's mind. Dracula, son of the dragon, king of vampires. Impossible, Naruto whispered, echoing Valerian's earlier exclamation. Not impossible at all, came a feminine voice from the shadows behind him. Just improbable to the point of miraculous. Naruto whirled, kunai instantly in hand, only to freeze at the sight of the woman emerging from the darkness. Tall and lithe, dressed in the distinctive gray armor of Konoha's Anbu Black Ops, with blonde hair cut in a practical bob beneath her porcelain mask. What struck him, however, was not her appearance but the bizarre sense of recognition that washed over him, recognition that had nothing to do with her being a fellow Konoha shinobi. Who are you? He demanded, not lowering his weapon despite the allied headband she wore. The woman reached up and removed her mask, revealing a youthful face with bright blue eyes that dyed him with an intensity that matched his own. My designation is Anbu Captain Seras Victoria. I've been assigned to monitor you for the past 3 months. Monitor me, Naruto repeated, anger flaring. Under whose authority? The highest, she replied simply. Lady Tsunade herself. The revelation that the Hokage had placed him under surveillance stung, but Naruto pushed the feeling aside to focus on more immediate concerns. You know what's happening to me. It wasn't a question, but Seras nodded anyway. I have theories, suspicions that tonight's events have largely confirmed. She gestured to the mural. That man, Dracula, Vlad Tepes, the Count, Alucard, he was many things in his long existence. But most importantly to us, he was my master. Naruto struggled to process her words against the backdrop of impossible visions and physical transformations. That's not possible. This mural depicts someone who lived centuries ago, in another world entirely. A sad smile touched Seras's lips. Another world, yes. Centuries ago, also yes. Impossible. Clearly not, given what's happening to you now. She took a step closer, her gaze fixed on his transformed eyes. Quote, I've waited a very long time to find you again, master. The title sent another cascade of memories through Naruto's mind. This woman in different clothing, wielding massive weapons, her eyes glowing crimson as she fought alongside the man in red. I'm not your master, Naruto protested, though the denial felt hollow against the weight of the memories pressing against his consciousness. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, Jonin of the Hidden Leaf Village. Yes, you are, Seras agreed. Just as I am Anbu Captain Seras Victoria. But we are also more. The cycle of reincarnation is mysterious, but souls as powerful as yours and mine leave impressions on the universe, impressions that sometimes find their way into new vessels, new lives. Naruto's mind raced, connecting fragments of memory and legend. You're saying we're reincarnations of people from another world entirely. That's no less bizarre than a 9-tailed demon fox being sealed within an infant, Seras interrupted gently. Or the existence of reanimated dead controlled by forbidden jutsu. Or eyes that can manipulate reality itself. She had a point. The shinobi world was filled with phenomena that defied conventional explanation. Still, this felt different, more personal, more fundamental to his very identity. These vampires, Naruto said, testing the unfamiliar word that nonetheless felt right on his tongue. What Valerian and his people are. What you're suggesting I am becoming. What are they exactly? Seras's expression grew solemn. Immortal beings who feed on human blood. Creatures of the night with supernatural abilities, strength, speed, regeneration, shapeshifting, command over darkness itself. In the other world, they were feared, hunted, and in some cases, worshipped. And they exist here. In our world, the implications were staggering. In small numbers, Seras confirmed. Mostly hiding in the shadows of society, feeding discreetly. The Hellsing organization, which has an equivalent in his world, keeps them in check when necessary. Naruto's thoughts turned to his teammate, Kenta. They killed him for his blood. Yes, Seras's blunt confirmation carried a weight of experience. That's what most vampires do. But you were different. Even as Alucard, you operated by a code. Monstrous at times, yes, but with purpose. With honor of a sort. The hunger that had been temporarily subdued roared back to life as she spoke of blood. Naruto gritted his teeth against the sensation, feeling his elongated canines press against his lower lip. I can feel it, he admitted, voice strained. The hunger, the thirst. If what you're saying is true, how do I control it? How do I prevent myself from becoming a monster that preys on the very people I've sworn to protect? Seras's expression softened with understanding. The hunger never truly disappears, but it can be managed. There are alternatives to killing. Blood banks, animal blood in emergencies, willing donors. And your unique situation actually provides an advantage. The Nine Tails, Naruto realized. Its chakra has always healed me, sustained me. Exactly. The demon fox's energy appears to have been suppressing your vampiric nature since birth. Keeping it dormant. But it's also likely been feeding it in some way, explaining your extraordinary stamina and healing abilities. Naruto turned back to the mural, studying the face of the vampire king who, if Seras was to be believed, represented his past life. The aristocratic features bore no resemblance to his own, yet something in the predatory stance, the confident smirk, felt disturbingly familiar. Why now? He asked. Why is this happening after 17 years? The temple, Seras replied, gesturing to their surroundings. This place exists in both worlds, a nexus point. Being here, combined with the proximity to other vampires, likely triggered the awakening. It was always a matter of time. A thought occurred to Naruto, sending a chill down his spine. My parents. Is this why they? No. Seras cut him off firmly. Your parents died protecting you in the village from the Nine Tails. This has nothing to do with that. Souls see. King rebirth finds suitable vessels by complex spiritual mechanisms we barely understand. It's coincidence, or perhaps fate, that you became the Nine Tails Jinchuriki in this life. The answer Pravi. Dead small comfort but allowed Naruto to refocus on more immediate concerns. Valerian and his people, they recognized what I am before I did. They'll be back, undoubtedly, Seras agreed. Your Awok, ending changes the power dynamics of their hidden society. Alucard is, the most powerful vampire to ever exist. His reincarnation represents both opportunity and threat to their kind. Naruto paced the ancient temple floor, mind working through tactical implications even as he struggled with the metaphysical bombshell that had been dropped on his identity. We need to report this to the Hokage. These vampires represent a potential threat to the village if they can kill and convert people at will. That was my assignment all along, Seras revealed. To monitor you for signs of awakening and to report back when it happened. But there's something you should know first. The gravity in her voice made Naruto pause. What? The Hokage isn't the only one waiting for this report. The Reason organization, the modern equivalent of the Hellsing organization I mentioned, that has been preparing for this possibility for generations. And what do they want with me? Seras hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Their founder made a promise to contain and direct Alucard's power should he ever return. They take this oath very seriously. Contain, Naruto repeated, not liking the implications. It's complicated, Seras admitted. The relationship between Alucard and the Hellsing family was based on ancient blood magic, willingly given service in exchange for purpose and direction. It prevented the Vampire King from becoming the monster he could have been. The explanation raised more questions than it answered, but before Naruto could press further, a new sensation washed over him, awareness of approaching chakra signatures. Multiple individuals, moving fast through the forest toward the temple. "We have company," he stated flatly, all personal concerns tempo rarely set aside as the shinobi tactician took precedence. "At least 6, maybe more." Seras nodded, already replacing her Anbu mask. "Valyrian's group, returning with reinforcements. They won't let you leave easily now that they know what you are." Naruto closed his eyes briefly, centering himself against the competing impulses raging through his system. The shinobi's discipline, the vampire's hunger, the human's fear. And beneath it all, the demon fox's simmering power. When his eyes opened again, the crimson glow had intensified. "Then let's show them exactly who they're dealing with," he said. Shadows beginning to writhe around his form once more. "Both of us." A fierce grin spread across Seras's face behind her mask. "Just like old times, master. Though you don't remember them yet." Together, they moved toward the temple entrance, prepared to confront the approaching vampires. As they reached the threshold, Naruto paused, looking back at the mural one last time, at the face of the man he had apparently once been. "I am Naruto Uzumaki," he said firmly, as much to himself as to Seras. "Whatever I was before, whatever power is awakening in me now, that doesn't change." "Of course not," Seras agreed. "But it does expand who you are. The question isn't whether you'll be Naruto or Alucard, it's what kind of vampire King Naruto Uzumaki will choose to become." With that sobering thought, they stepped into the misty night to face their hunters, leaving the ancient temple and its revelations behind. For now, outside, the forest had fallen completely silent, as if Nat Ur itself held its breath in anticipation of the confrontation to come. The mist had thickened further, reducing visibility to mere feet, but Naruto found that his newly awakened senses compensated effortlessly. Sense carried information about position and number, sounds revealed movement and intention, and something more primal altogether allowed him to sense the presence of other vampires approaching through the darkness. "They're surrounding us," he murmured to Seras, who had taken up position at his back. 12 of them now. Valyrian must have called in significant reinforcements. "They fear what you represent," Seras replied, her voice muffled slightly by her mask. "The return of the No-Life King means the end of their autonomy." In the old world, vampire society had strict hierarchies, with Alucard at the apex. "I have no interest in ruling anyone," Naruto stated flatly. "Especially not a secret society of blood drinkers." A chuckle emerged from the mist to their right. "How refreshingly democratic of you," Valyrian's cultured voice commented. "But I'm afraid the matter isn't one of choice. Hierarchy among our kind is established by power, not preference." The pale aristocrat materialized from the mist, flanked by 2 hulking figures whose musculature strained against their antiquated clothing. Behind Naruto, more vampires appeared, effectively cutting off retreat to all but the most skilled shinobi. "I've given your situation considerable thought," Valyrian continued conversationally. "The great Alucard, reborn without memory or full power, accompanied by his fledgling from a previous life. Truly fascinating, especially considering the unique complications of your current existence, Naruto Uzumaki." Naruto tensed. "What complications?" "The 9-tailed fox, of course." Valyrian's smile widened at Naruto's surprise. "Oh yes, we know all about the Biju and their Jinchuriki. Our kind has existed in this world for far longer than your hidden villages. We've observed, learned, adapted." "Then you should have learned to stay hidden," Naruto replied coldly. "Killing my teammate was a mistake you won't have the opportunity to repeat." The threat hung in the air for a moment before Valyrian sighed dramatically. "Always the hero. Some aspects of personality truly do transcend reincarnation, it seems. But you misunderstand our intentions. We didn't bring reinforcements to destroy you, but to escort you." "Escort me where, exactly?" "To the conclave, of course." Valyrian gestured expansively. "The ruling council of our kind in this world. Awakening requires their immediate attention and guidance." Seras shifted subtly behind Naruto, her posture communicating skepticism without words. "The conclave has no authority over him," she stated firmly. "Especially given his primary allegiance to Konoha." "Ah, the loyal servant speaks," Valyrian remarked, his tone dripping with condescension. "Tell me, little fledgling, have you explained to him the nature of your bond? The blood oath that binds master and servant across lifetimes." The question clearly struck a nerve, as Seras' chakra fluctuated momentarily. That's not relevant at present. I disagree entirely, Valerian countered. Young Naruto deserves to understand exactly what you represent, not merely an Anbu captain assigned to monitor him, but a vampire yourself. Oh, Nehu has hidden her true nature even as she reported his every move to her masters. The accusation sent a jolt of surprise through Naruto, who glanced back at his companion with narrowed eyes. Is that true? You're a vampire as well. Seras' hesitation provided all the confirmation needed. Not exactly like us, Valerian interjected before she could answer. Something both more and less. A true-blooded vampire sired by Alucard himself in his previous incarnation. A servant bound by blood and oath to the Hellsing family, who, I might add, are considerably less friendly toward our kind than I am. Naruto's mind raced, processing this new information against the background of everything else he'd learned in the past hour. If Seras was indeed a vampire herself, that explained her familiarity with his condition and her claims about their past connection. But it also raised troubling questions about her true loyalties and motivations. We don't have time for this, Seras finally responded, removing her mask completely to meet Naruto's gaze directly. Yes, I am a vampire. Yes, I was your fledgling in our previous lives. And yes, I serve the modern incarnation of the Hellsing family. But my assignment to watch over you came from the Hokage herself, who has been aware of vampire existence for years. The revelation that Tsunade had kept such significant information from him stung. But Naruto pushed aside the feeling to focus on the immediate threat. 12 vampires surrounded them, led by an aristocrat who clearly had his own agenda. The tactical situation demanded prioritization of survival over personal feelings. Whatever history exists between us can be sorted out later, Naruto decided, returning his attention to Valerian. Right now, I'm declining your invitation to this conclave. My team needs me, and I have a mission report to deliver to the Hokage. Valerian's expression hardened, the veneer of civility falling away. I'm afraid I must insist. The awakening of a vampire of your potential power cannot go unaddressed. If you will not come willingly, we are prepared to compel you. I'd like to see you try, Naruto responded, chakra surging through his system as he prepared for combat. The strange new power that had manifested earlier, the living shadows, the enhanced senses, bubbled just beneath the surface of his consciousness, ready to be unleashed. A tense silence fell over the clearing as both sides assessed the situation. Valerian clearly hadn't expected outright refusal, while Naruto calculated odds and strategies, acutely aware of Seras at his back. It was one of Valerian's lieutenants who broke the standoff, a muscular brute with a jagged scar running down his face. Enough talk, he growled, lunging forward with inhuman speed. Clawed hands extended toward Naruto's throat. The attack should have been too fast to counter, faster than any human shinobi could move, but Naruto's body responded with instincts that weren't entirely his own. He swayed aside with liquid grace, one hand catching the vampire's wrist while the other drove a kunai directly into the attacker's heart. For a heartbeat, surprise registered on the vampire's face, followed by mocking laughter. Foolish newborn. Conventional weapons cannot. The words died in his throat as Naruto channeled chakra through the kunai, not the standard blue energy of normal jutsu, but something darker. Infused with his newly awakened vampiric power. The vampire's body convulsed, his flesh graying and cracking like ancient parchment before collapsing into dust. Shock rippled through the assembled vampires. Even Valerian took an involuntary step backward, his composure momentarily shattered. Impossible, he whispered. Only a fully realized vampire Lord could destroy one of our kind so completely. Naruto stared at the pile of dust that had been a living creature seconds before, equally surprised by what had just happened. He hadn't consciously known how to kill a vampire. Yet some part of him had acted on instinct, combining shinobi techniques with vampire power in a way that proved devastatingly effective. The momentary shock gave way to chaos, as the remaining vampires attacked simultaneously. Seras moved with blinding speed, her Anbu training enhanced by vampiric power as she engaged 3 attackers at once. Her fighting style combined shinobi techniques with movements that seemed designed specifically for vampire combat, targeting joints, using momentum against physically stronger opponents, and keeping them off balance. Naruto found himself surrounded by 4 vampires, each approaching from a different angle. Time seemed to slow as his perception accelerated, allowing him to track each attacker with perfect clarity. The hunger that had been simmering beneath his consciousness surged forward, accompanied by a cold tactical clarity that felt alien yet familiar. Shadow Clone Jutsu, he called out, forming the cross-shaped ND seal that had been his signature technique since childhood. A dozen perfect copies of himself materialized in puffs of smoke, each bearing the same crimson eyes and elongated canines as the original. But these shadow clones were different from those he'd created thousands of times before. Darkness seemed to cling to them, making their edges blur slightly as they moved with perfect coordination to engage the attacking vampires. Valerian himself held back, watching the battle unfold with calculating eyes. Fascinating, he murmured. The shadow clones of shinobi tradition, infused with vampiric essence. The possibilities are. His observation was cut short as one of Naruto's clones broke through the defensive line and lunged directly for him. Valerian barely avoided the attack, his aristocratic composure cracking further as he was forced to engage directly. You are powerful, even half awakened, Valerian acknowledged, dodging another strike. But still ignorant of your true potential. The Conclave could teach you to harness these abilities fully. I'll figure it out on my own, Naruto replied through the clone, continuing his assault while the original coordinated the broader battle. Across the clearing, Seras had dispatched one of her opponents and was pressing her advantage against the others. Naruto, she called out, they're trying to separate us. Stay close. The warning came just as the ground beneath Naruto's feet suddenly liquefied, Earth-style jutsu deployed by one of the vampires with shinobi training. As he began to sink, 2 massive vampires charged him simultaneously. Clearly intending to subdue rather than kill. Instinct took over again. Naruto's body dissolved into a swarm of bats that scattered in all directions, confounding his attackers before reforming several yards away. The transformation had been instinctual, without conscious thought or hand signs. A purely vampiric ability that left him momentarily stunned even as he capitalized on the tactical advantage it provided. The bat transformation already, Valerian observed, genuine concern now evident in his voice. He's awakening faster than anticipated. We need to end this now, before he accesses more of Alucard's powers. At his command, the remaining vampires changed tactics, focusing their attacks on Seras rather than Naruto. 3 of them managed to restrain her. Momentarily, long enough for another to drive a silver-tipped stake through her shoulder, pinning her to a tree with a cry of pain. The sight of Seras injured triggered something primal in Naruto. A protective rage that transcended his normal concern for a comrade. Get away from her, he roared, the shadows around him exploding outward in a wave of destructive force that sent vampires flying in all directions. He was at Seras's side in an instant, ripping the stake from her shoulder with one hand while the other supported her weight. Are you all right? I'll heal, she assured him through gritted teeth. Blood seeping through her Anbu uniform. But we need to retreat. There are too many, and you're not fully in control of your powers yet. Before Naruto could respond, slow applause echoed through the clearing. Valerian stood alone now, his remaining forces regrouping around him at a cautious distance. Magnificent, the aristocratic vampire declared. Truly the power of the no-life king begins to manifest. But your fledgling is correct, young Naruto. You lack control, understanding, and most importantly, the knowledge of what you truly are and what that means for both our worlds. Naruto positioned himself protectively in front of Seras, who was already showing signs of accelerated healing, another confirmation of her vampiric nature. I know enough to understand your threat to my village and my comrades. A narrow perspective, Valerian sighed. But understandable given your limited information. Very well, I shall withdraw for now and report your awakening to the Conclave. They will decide the next steps. His crimson eyes fixed on Naruto with unsettling intensity. But know this, what has begun tonight cannot be undone. The hunger you feel will grow. The powers emerging will demand mastery. And the attention you have drawn will bring others far less diplomatic than myself. With that ominous warning, Valerian and his remaining forces melted into the mist. Their chakra signatures fading until Naruto could no longer detect them. The sudden absence of immediate threat allowed exhaustion to crash over him. The shadow clones dissipated automatically as his concentration wavered, and the crimson glow in his eyes dimmed slightly. The hunger, however, remained, a constant, gnawing presence beneath his thoughts. "We need to move," Seras urged, testing her injured shoulder which had already stopped bleeding. "Valyrian will return with greater numbers, or worse, members of the Conclave itself." "You have a lot of explaining to do," Naruto told her flatly. Even as he helped her to her feet. "About who you really are, about this Hellsing organization, and about why the Hokage kept all of this from me." "You'll get your explanations," Seras promised. "But not here. We need to reach your team at the rendezvous point, then return to Konoha immediately. Lady Tsunade needs to know that your awakening has begun, and—" She hesitated. "And what? And we need to contact the Hellsing organization," she finished reluctantly. "Their current leader has been preparing for this possibility her entire life. She'll want to meet you immediately." Naruto frowned, not liking the implications. "This leader, does she have a name?" "Integra," Seras replied, a complex mixture of emotions coloring her voice. "Sir Integra Fairbrook Winget's Hellsing. The descendant of Abraham Van Helsing, who bound Alucard to his family's service centuries ago." The name triggered another flash of memory, the platinum blonde woman with steely blue eyes and an unbending will. Issuing commands with absolute authority. A woman who had commanded respect even from the most powerful vampire in existence. "And what exactly does she expect from me?" Naruto asked, already suspecting the answer. Seras met his gaze directly. "The restoration of an ancient covenant. Service in exchange for purpose. The same arrangement that prevented Alucard from becoming the monster he could have been." "I'm not Alucard," Naruto stated firmly. "I'm Naruto Uzumaki, shinobi of the Hidden Leaf Village. My loyalty is to the Hokage and the village, not some organization I've never heard of." "I understand," Seras said gently, "but the power awakening within you, it needs direction, control. The hunger you feel now is only the beginning. Without proper guidance, it could consume you entirely." The warning struck uncomfortably close to Naruto's own fears. He had spent his childhood mastering the Nine Tails chakra, learning to control its destructive potential. The idea of facing a similar but entirely different struggle with his emerging vampire nature was exhausting to contemplate. "We'll deal with that when we reach Konoha," he decided, turning toward the direction of the rendezvous point. "Right now, my team needs me." As they moved through the forest, Naruto found himself hyper-aware of Seras's presence beside him, not merely as a fellow shinobi, but as someone connected to him by bonds that transcended ordinary understanding. Whatever she had been to him in a previous life, whatever loyalty she claimed now, she had fought at his side when it mattered. That earned her the benefit of the doubt, at least until they reached the safety of the village. The mist began to thin as they traveled, allowing moonlight to filter through the canopy once more. Dawn was still hours away, but Naruto found himself dreading the coming of sunlight with an instinctive wariness that hadn't existed before his transformation. "Will the sun burn me?" he asked abruptly, giving voice to the concern. Seras glanced at him with surprise before understanding dawned. "No, that's largely myth, at least for powerful vampires. It will be uncomfortable, maybe weakening, but not destructive. Especially for you, with the Nine Tails chakra providing additional protection." The answer provided small comfort as they continued their journey in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Naruto's mind whirled with implications and questions, about his identity, about his future, about the hidden world that had suddenly revealed itself to him. Whatever came next, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The Crimson Awakening had begun, and with it, the transformation of Naruto Uzumaki into something both more and less than human. Something ancient and powerful, something hungry. The true challenge would not be facing Valyrian, the Conclave, or even this mysterious Hellsing organization. It would be remaining himself, maintaining his humanity, his principles, his bonds, while integrating the darkness that now flowed through his veins as surely as blood itself. As the first hints of dawn colored the eastern sky, Naruto and Seras finally reached the rendezvous point where Takumi waited with their injured teammate. The coming day would bring explanations, decisions, and the first steps on a journey neither had fully anticipated. The Crimson Awakening had begun. Chapter 1 End Chapter 2, The Hellsing Heir. Dawn arrived with unexpected mercy. The soft golden light filtering through Konoha's eastern gate caressed rather Han burned Naruto's newly sensitive skin, a welcome relief from the dread that had been building during their hurried journey back to the village. The first rays illuminated the leaf symbol carved proudly into the massive wooden barriers. A sight that had always filled him with belonging. Today, it sparked an uncomfortable question: did he still belong here? 3 days had passed since the temple incident. 3 days of suppressing a hunger that gnawed at his insides with increasing persistence. 3 days of discovering abilities that emerged without warning, shadows responding to his emotions. Heightened senses overwhelming him at inopportune moments, strength that crushed a metal kunai handle to powder when his concentration lapsed. 3 days with Seras Victoria as his constant companion, simultaneously his guide and his warden. "You're quiet," she observed, matching his stride as they approached the village checkpoint. Unlike the Anbu uniform she'd worn at the temple, today she dressed in standard Jonin attire. Her Anbu mask nowhere in sight. Only her distinctive blonde hair and the watchful intensity of her blue eyes remained the same. Naruto gestured toward the rising sun. "I'm surprised I didn't burst into flames. Isn't that what happens to vampires in daylight?" "Hollywood nonsense," Seras replied with a dismissive wave. "The sun is uncomfortable, yes, like a Persis. Tent sunburn you can't escape, but deadly. Not to true Nosferatu, especially not to one with your heritage." Her delicate phrasing made Naruto snort. "You mean the demon fox helping the vampire king? Sounds like the setup for a bad joke." Quote, "It's unprecedented," she acknowledged. "The Nine Tails chakra has been suppressing your vampiric nature since birth. Now they're integrating in ways I couldn't have predicted." "Lucky me." Seras studied his face. "You've handled this remarkably well, all things considered." Had he? Naruto wasn't sure. Outwardly, perhaps. Inside, he felt like a papier M. A shea construction holding together by sheer force of will, a collection of identities that didn't quite fit together. Shinobi, Jinchuriki, vampire. Each demanded dominance, each pulled in different directions. The checkpoint guards straightened as they approached. Neither appeared surprised by their arrival. News of their return had preceded them. Captain Uzumaki, the taller guard acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Captain Victoria, Lady Tsunade requests your immediate presence at the tower." "Of course she does," Naruto muttered. His relationship with the Hokage had always been complicated. Somewhere between surrogate mother and military commander, but the revelation that she'd kept vital information about his nature from him had added a new layer of complexity. Seras's hand touched his arm briefly. "She had her reasons," she said softly. "We all have reasons," he replied. "That doesn't make them good ones." The village streets were beginning to stir with early morning activity, shopkeepers raising shutters. Ninjas departing for missions, civilians starting their daily routines. No one appeared to notice anything different about Naruto, though several offered familiar greetings. If they detected the crimson undertone that now permanently lingered in his eyes, they gave no indication. "Your control is improving," Seras commented as they navigated the awakening village. "Why? Our appearance is almost completely normal." "Almost," Naruto echoed, running his tongue over canines that remained slightly too sharp. "Will that ever change back?" "With practice, you'll be able to suppress all physical manifestations entirely," she assured him. "Though there will always be tells that other vampires can recognize." A child darted across their path, laughing as she chased a ball. The sound pierced Naruto's enhanced hearing like a bell, while the scent of her, warm, alive, pulsing with vitality, triggered a wave of hunger that made him stumble. Seras steadied him with a firm grip on his shoulder. "Breathe through it," she instructed calmly. "Focus on something else." "Easy for you to say," he growled, fighting back the predatory instinct. "You've had lifetimes to practice." "Actually, just one," she corrected. "I was turned shortly before the end of our previous existence. I've grown into my abilities in this life, just as you will." The reminder that she, too, had once faced this struggle helped. The hunger receded to manageable levels as they approached the Hokage Tower, an imposing structure that seemed particularly fortress-like this morning. As they entered the building, Naruto detected something unusual, an unfamiliar scent permeating the administrative center. Something distinctively foreign, a combination of expensive tobacco, aged paper, silver polish, and steel. Beneath it all lingered a subtle note that his newfound senses recognized as vampiric, though different from Seras or the temple vampires. "We have visitors," he observed quietly. Seras nodded, tension visible in her posture. "The Hellsing contingent arrived yesterday. They made excellent time. How did they even know what happened?" Naruto demanded as they climbed the stairs. "The mission report wasn't submitted until we returned to Konoha. I sent a message through secure channels after the temple incident," Seras admitted. "Standard protocol when a supernatural event occurs. So much for loyalty to the Hokage first," Naruto muttered. Seras stopped abruptly, turning to face him with unexpected fierceness. "My loyalty to Konoha has never been in question. But this situation transcends village politics, Naruto. What awakened in you at that temple could destabilize the entire supernatural balance of our world. The Hellsing organization has maintained that balance for generations." Her intensity surprised him. Throughout their journey back to Konoha, Seras had maintained a professional demeanor, informative but reserved. This flash of passion revealed depths he hadn't glimpsed before. "And what exactly does this organization want with me?" he asked, softening his tone. Something like sadness flashed across her features. "That's complicated." "Then uncomplicate it." "I can't," she said, genuine regret coloring her words. "Some things need to be explained by Integra herself." Before Naruto could press further, the door to the Hokage's office opened. Shizune emerged, her usual composed expression replaced by barely concealed stress. "There you are," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Lady Tsunade is waiting with the guests." The slight hesitation before the final word spoke volumes about the atmosphere inside. Naruto took a deep breath, centering himself as he'd been taught since his earliest days at the academy. Whatever awaited him beyond that door, he would face it with the dignity befitting a shinobi of the Hidden Leaf. "Let's get this over with," he said, striding forward with outward confidence that belied his inner turmoil. The Hokage's office had been subtly rearranged. The usual desk remained central, with Tsunade seated behind it, but additional chairs had been positioned to create what appeared to be negotiating positions. The morning sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. 3 unfamiliar figures occupied the space, their positioning suggesting both authority and watchfulness. Tsunade rose as they entered, her amber eyes assessing Naruto with medical precision. "Captain Uzumaki, Captain Victoria," she acknowledged formally, using their ranks rather than familiar address. "Thank you for responding promptly." Naruto bowed slightly, protocol overriding his complex emotions toward his leader. "Hokage-sama, allow me to introduce our guests," Tsunade continued, gesturing toward the strangers. "Sir Integra Fairbrook Winget's Hellsing, director of the Hellsing organization. Captain Percival Winterbourne, her security chief. And Dr. Mirai Tepps, supernatural research specialist." Naruto's attention fixed immediately on the woman seated directly opposite Tsunade. Tall and imperious, with platinum blonde hair cut in a severe style. She projected authority without effort. Steel blue eyes regarded him through circular wire-rimmed glasses, their gaze clinical yet somehow personal. Though she appeared to be in her early 40s, something in those eyes suggested far greater age and experience. "So," Integra Hellsing said, her voice cultured with a distinctly foreign accent, "the prodigal king returns." The words carried a weight that settled in the room like a physical presence. Her gaze never wavered from Naruto's face, studying him with an intensity that felt invasive. "I'm Naruto Uzumaki," he responded deliberately. "Jonin of Konohagakure. Nothing more, nothing less." A hint of amusement flickered across Integra's austere features. "Is that what you believe?" She reached for a thin cigar resting in an ashtray, bringing it to her lips without breaking eye contact. How fascinating. The man beside her, Captain Winterbourne, was a study in contained vigilance. Tall and broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair and a face marked by old battle scars, he carried himself with military precision. Though he wore no visible weapons, Naruto's enhanced senses detected several concealed firearms beneath his formal attire, weapons uncommon in the shinobi world. The third visitor presented a stark contrast to her companions. Dr. Tepps appeared younger, perhaps early 30s, with striking features and long black hair pulled into a practical braid. Her dark eyes held a scholarly intensity as they flickered between various instruments arranged on a small table beside her. Unlike the others, her attention seemed more focused on collecting data than on Naruto himself. Your report was remarkably detailed, Captain Victoria, Integra continued, exhaling a perfect ring of smoke. Though I suspect certain nuances can only be appreciated in person. Seras bowed her head slightly. The situation developed rapidly, Sir Integra. Many aspects remain unclear. Indeed, Integra tapped ash from her cigar with deliberate precision. Hence our expeditious arrival. When a vampire of Alucard's caliber reawakens, particularly in a Jinchuriki vessel, protocols must be observed. Naruto's patience, already stretched thin, snapped. I'm standing right here. If you want to talk about me, talk to me, not around me. Tsunade's expression tightened, but Integra merely raised an eyebrow, looking almost pleased by the outburst. Direct, unintimidated, assertive, she nodded slightly, personality traits consistent with both your current identity and your previous incarnation. Encouraging. Lady Hellsing, Tsunade interjected. Her tone carefully diplomatic, perhaps we should address the immediate concerns before delving into historical analysis. Of course, Hokage-sama, Integra agreed smoothly. The most pressing matter is containment and training. Captain Uzumaki's awakening will not have gone unnoticed by the vampire community, as evidenced by the temple encounter. Follow-up intervention is inevitable and potentially catastrophic without proper preparation. Containment, Naruto repeated, not liking the term. Integra fixed him with that penetrating stare again. Perhaps, structured environment would be more palatable terminology. The fact remains that you are experiencing the emergence of extraordinarily dangerous abilities with minimal understanding or control. Abilities that, when fully manifested, could level this entire village should your control lapse. I've spent my entire life controlling dangerous power, Naruto countered. The 9 tails, as a known quantity, Integra interrupted smoothly. Studied, documented, with established sealing protocols. What's awakening in you now is fundamentally different, power that operates on principles entirely outside shinobi experience. Dr. Tepps spoke for the first time, her voice surprisingly melodic despite the clinical precision of her words. Our preliminary readings indicate a complex integration of Biju Chakra with awakening vampire abilities. The interaction creates power manifestations that exceed standard vampiric parameters by approximately 340%. Meaning? Tsunade asked sharply. Meaning? Integra answered instead. That Captain Uzumaki is potentially the most powerful supernatural entity to emerge in over 3 centuries. More powerful, perhaps, than even his previous incarnation. The assessment landed heavily in the room. Naruto felt multiple pairs of eyes on him, evaluating, calculating, measuring the threat he represented. I haven't hurt anyone, he stated flatly. And I don't intend to. Intentions are irrelevant against biological imperatives, Integra replied. The hunger will grow. Without proper training and protocols, casualties are inevitable. What exactly are you proposing? Tsunade asked, leaning forward slightly. Integra extinguished her cigar with deliberate precision. Captain Uzumaki should be transferred to Hellsing custody immediately. Our facility in the L. and of Iron is specifically designed for vampire containment and training. There, he can learn to manage his abilities in a controlled environment without risk to the civilian population. Absolutely not, Naruto responded instantly. That's not your decision to make, Integra stated, unruffled by his objection. The hell it isn't. Naruto's anger flared, and with it, shadows began to writhe ubtly around his feet, an unconscious manifestation of his vampiric power. Captain Winterbourne shifted slightly, one hand moving toward his concealed weapon. Dr. Tepps's instruments beeped urgently. Energy spike detected, she reported calmly. Class 3 manifestation initiating. Naruto, Seras murmured warningly. With effort, he reined in the power, forcing the shadows back into quiescence. The action required considerably more concentration than he would have liked. Prove my point more eloquently, why don't you? Integra remarked dryly. Tsunade cleared her throat. While I appreciate the Hellsing organization's expertise, Naruto Uzumaki is a Konoha shinobi. His status as Jinchuriki makes him a critical village asset. Any arrangement would need to acknowledge these facts. We Well aware of his strategic importance, Integra acknowledged. However, without proper training, that asset becomes a liability. The vampire community is already aware of his awakening. Those who feared Alucard in his previous incarnation will seek to eliminate the threat before his powers fully manifest. Those who revered him will attempt to claim his allegiance. Either scenario presents unacceptable risk. The room fell silent as the implications settled. Naruto found himself studying Integra more carefully, the rigid posture that spoke of military discipline, the slight tremor in her right hand that suggested age or perhaps illness carefully masked by force of will, the cross-shaped pin on her lapel that his vampire senses recognized as blessed silver. This was a woman who had dedicated her life to containing supernatural threats. Who viewed him as exactly that, a threat to be managed. You mentioned a covenant, he said finally. Between Alucard and your family. Something flickered in Integra's expression. Surprise, perhaps, that he would raise this topic directly. Yes, she confirmed. A blood oath that bound Alucard to the Hellsing family's service. A mutual arrangement, and that provided direction for his power and protection for humanity. Slavery, you mean? Naruto challenged. Integra's lip curved slightly. Hardly. Alucard could have broken the bonds at any time had he truly wished it. He chose to remain bound because it gave him purpose, a cause greater than mere survival or power accumulation. She leaned forward slightly. Something I suspect you understand quite well, Naruto Uzumaki. The desire to protect others. To serve a greater good. The assessment struck uncomfortably close to his core values, and Naruto found himself momentarily at a loss for response. The covenant was voluntary, Seras added quietly, renewed by choice with each generation. And now you expect me to enter into this arrangement? Naruto asked. Eventually, Integra confirmed. But first, you must understand what you are. What you're becoming. The full implications of the power awakening within you. She gestured to Dr. Tepes. Which is why our immediate concern is secure transport to our facility for evaluation and training. Tsunade's expression hardened. As I said, Naruto is a Konoha shinobi. Any arrangement must acknowledge his duties and loyalties to this village. With respect, Hokage-sama, Integra countered, you fail to grasp the gravity of the situation. The vampire known as Alucard was not merely powerful, he was a force of nature. A being capable of destruction on a scale that dwarfs even the Biju. If Captain Uzumaki fully manifests those abilities without proper conditioning and control mechanisms in place, the consequences would be catastrophic. I'm right here. Naruto enunciated each word with barely controlled frustration. Stop talking about me like I'm some weapon to be argued over. Integra's gaze snapped to him, sharp and assessing. But that is precisely what you are, Captain Uzumaki. A weapon of incalculable power. The question is not whether you will be used, but by whom, and to what end. Before Naruto could formulate a response, a sharp knock interrupted the tense standoff. Shizune entered without waiting for acknowledgement, her expression grave. Forgive the interruption, Lady Tsunade, but we've received an urgent report. An attack on the eastern border outpost. Multiple casualties. Tsunade straightened. Hostile identification. Unknown. Shizune replied. The survivors described the attack. RSs. Pale figures moving faster than the eye could track. They drained the victims of blood. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Naruto didn't need enhanced senses to detect the shift in Integra's demeanor, from calculating diplomacy to cold fury. It's beginning already, she stated flatly. Faster than anticipated. Valyrian, Naruto growled. He said others would come. Not Valyrian, drive, Tepes interjected, checking a small device that had begun emitting a soft, pulsing light. Our sensors indicate Class B entities, mid-range vampire signatures without noble lineage. Foot soldiers, essentially. Testing defenses, Captain Winterbourne suggested, speaking for the first time. His voice was deep and graveled, carrying the weight of decades of military experience. Probing response capabilities. Integra nodded sharply. Standard vanguard tactics. The main force will follow once they've assessed resistance levels. Tsunade's hands tightened on her desk. You're suggesting this is a coordinated attack. Inevitable, Integra replied. The awakening of Alucard's power represents a paradigm shift in supernatural politics. Various factions will seek to eliminate, control, or ally with that power. Her gaze shifted to Naruto. This is precisely why immediate transfer to our facility is essential. Captain Uzumaki's presence here makes Konoha a target. The accusation stung, particularly because Naruto couldn't entirely refute it. If vampires were attacking because of him, how many casualties? He asked Shizune. Her expression softened with sympathy. 6 confirmed dead, 4 critically injured, 6 dead. The knowledge settled like a stone in Naruto's stomach. 6 lives ended because of what he was becoming. I'll handle it, he stated flatly. Absolutely not, Integra countered immediately. Engaging without proper training would be catastrophically irresponsible. Tsunade's expression turned calculating. Perhaps a compromise. A joint operation. Konoha forces with Hellsing supervision. It would address the immediate threat while allowing us to assess Captain Uzumaki's capabilities under controlled conditions. Integra's eyes narrowed fractionally. A field test, you mean? A necessary response to an active threat, Tsunade corrected smoothly. One that coincidentally allows all parties to gather relevant data. The political maneuvering might have continued indefinitely if Naruto hadn't stepped forward, his patience exhausted. People are dying while you debate jurisdiction. I'm going to stop it. Anyone who wants to help is welcome. Anyone who wants to stand in my way can try. The declaration hung in the air for a moment before Seras moved to stand beside him. I'll accompany Captain Uzumaki. Int. Egra's expression remained unreadable as she studied them both. Finally, she nodded to Captain Winterbourne, who rose smoothly from his chair. The Hellsing organization will provide tactical support, she stated. The words carrying the weight of formal declaration. Under the following conditions, Captain Uzumaki accepts field command from Captain Winterbourne and Dr. Teps is permitted to monitor the engagement from a safe distance. It wasn't ideal, but Naruto recognized a workable compromise when he heard one. Fine. Authorized, Tsunade confirmed, her tone making it clear that further discussion was closed. Assemble a response team immediately. Shizune will provide tactical briefing en route. As the meeting dissolved into urgent preparation, Naruto found himself momentarily alone with Integra Hellsing. The others had moved toward the door, but the Hellsing director remained seated, her penetrating gaze fixed on him with unsettling intensity. You're nothing like him, she observed quietly. And yet, in the ways that matter most, you are identical. I don't know what that means, Naruto admitted. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. You will. She rose with fluid grace that belied her age. We'll continue our discussion after this field test. Assuming you survive it. I'm harder to kill than I look, Naruto replied, matching her faint smile with one of his own. So was he. Something like nostalgia flickered across her features before disappearing behind professional detachment. Remember this, Naruto Uzumaki. The greatest danger you face isn't external enemies. It's the hunger, the power, the temptation to become what you could be, rather than what you should be. With those cryptic words, she moved past him toward the door, leaving Naruto to ponder their meaning as he prepared to face his first battle as something more, and perhaps less, than human. The eastern border outpost lay in ruins. What had once been a fortified observation post was now a charnel house. Buildings reduced to splinters, defensive seals shattered, bodies strewn across blood-soaked ground. The scent of death hung heavy in the afternoon air, a miasma that assaulted Naruto's heightened senses like a physical blow. Systematic elimination of defenders, Captain Winterbourne observed clinically as they surveyed the destruction. No survivors intentionally left. Wasn't just an attack, it was a message. For me, Naruto concluded grimly. The Hellsing officer didn't contradict him. Vampiric attacks follow patterns. This one reads as a challenge, establishing dominance, demonstrating power. They want you to know they can strike at will. The response team had deployed with remarkable efficiency, a testament to both Konoha's military readiness and the Hellsing organization's specialized expertise. 4 Anbu operatives, including Seras, formed the primary combat unit. Dr. Teps had established a monitoring station half a kilometer back, surrounded by protective seals and guarded by 2 Konoha Chunin. Captain Winterbourne, despite his formal title, functioned more as a tactical advisor than a field commander, deferring to Naruto's knowledge of local terrain and resources. The victims were drained completely, Seras reported, returning from examining the bodies. Methodical work. These weren't newly turned vampires in a feeding frenzy. They knew exactly what they were doing. Trail leads northeast, one of the Anbu added, a tall figure in a boar mask. Multiple tracks, moving fast but not covering their path. They want to be followed. Obvious trap, another Anbu commented. Of course it's a trap, Winterborn agreed, checking one of his strange weapons, a large pistol with modifications Naruto didn't recognize. The question is there we spring it on our terms or theirs. Naruto knelt beside one of the fallen Konoha shinobi, a young woman whose Hittite indicated recent promotion to Chunin. Her eyes stared sightlessly at the cloudless sky, her throat torn open with savage precision. The sight should have triggered his hunger. Fresh blood still glistened on her wound, but instead, he felt only cold rage building beneath his breastbone. These were his people, his to protect, his responsibility. Something of his thoughts must have shown on his face, because Seras moved closer, her voice pitched for his ears alone. Control, Naruto. Anger feeds the bloodlust. Good, he replied softly. I'm going to need it. He rose smoothly, decision made. We follow their trail. If they want me, they'll get me, but not the way they expect. Winterborn's weathered face revealed nothing, but he nodded once, sharply. Tactical suggestions. Split formation, Naruto replied without hesitation. I'll take point with Seras. Anbu units flank at 50-meter intervals. Captain Winterborn provides rear security and communication with Dr. Tepps. You're making yourself the primary target, Winterborn observed. I already am the primary target, Naruto corrected. Might as well use that to our advantage. The plan was quickly finalized, with subtle adjustments based on Winterborn's experience with vampire engagement protocols. As they prepared to move out, Naruto created a shadow clone to send back to Konoha with a preliminary report, a standard procedure that felt strangely inadequate against the magnitude of what they faced. The trail led them deeper into the forests that bordered Fire Country, away from established routes and toward the mountainous region that served as a natural boundary. As they traveled, Naruto found his enhanced senses providing information with unsettling clarity, the lingering scent of the vampires ahead, distinctive and alien, the sound of small animals falling silent as they passed. The subtle shifts in air temperature as afternoon began yielding to evening. They're leading us to higher ground, he observed quietly to Seras as they moved through the trees. Away from population centers. Tactical isolation, she agreed. Standard procedure when establishing dominance hierarchy. Naruto glanced at her sharply. You think this is about vampire politics? Not just an attack on Konoha. Both, Seras replied. Vampire society is intensely hierarchical. A power vacuum exists with Alucard's presence reintroduced. These attacks serve dual purposes, testing village defense, while simultaneously establishing positioning in the new order. I have no interest in their order, Naruto stated flatly. A ghost of a smile touched Seras's lips. Your interest is irrelevant. Your existence is the catalyst. The question now is whether you'll shape events or be shaped by them. The observation echoed Integra's earlier words uncomfortably. Before Naruto could formulate a response, a signal came from one of the flanking Anbu, 3 quick bird calls indicating contact imminent. They halted in a small clearing, the late afternoon sun slanting through the trees to create complex patterns of light and shadow. Perfect ambush terrain, with multiple approaches concealed by dense foliage and rocky outcroppings providing elevated positions. 7 distinct signatures, Seras murmured, her eyes scanning the surrounding forest. Surrounding us at equidistant points. Winterborn materialized beside them, moving with impressive silence for a non-shinobi. Classic encirclement. They'll test for weaknesses before committing. Naruto closed his eyes briefly, extending his senses beyond normal human parameters. The vampiric presence registered clearly now, cold spots in he warm tapestry of life energy that permeated the forest. But something else nagged at his awareness, a familiar signature that didn't belong. There's something else here, he muttered. Something wrong. Before either of his companions could respond, a slow, deliberate clapping echoed through the clearing. A figure emerged from the shadows beneath an ancient oak, tall and lean, dressed in a formal kimono of midnight blue that contrasted sharply with his silver-white hair. Very impressive, the stranger remarked, his voice carrying an accent Naruto couldn't place. Sensory development already. You exceed expectations, young prince. Winterborn's weapon appeared in his hand instantly, while Seras shifted into a combat stance. The Anbu melted from their positions to form a defensive perimeter. Who are you? Naruto demanded, studying the newcomer with both shinobi training and vampiric instinct. The stranger bowed with elaborate formality. Lord Silvius Bottori, at your service. Emissary of the Conclave of Night. Sent to evaluate the legitimacy of claims regarding Alucard's return. His crimson eyes, the unmistakable mark of a vampire, assessed Naruto with clinical interest. I must say, the resemblance is minimal, yet the power signature is unmistakable. You authorized the attack on our outpost, Naruto stated, not bothering to phrase it as a question. Silvius waved a dismissive hand. A regrettable necessity. We required verification of Konoha's response capabilities and your personal level of development. His lip curled slightly. The results were informative on both counts. Rage flared hot in Naruto's chest. 6 dead, 4 critically injured, dismissed as a regrettable necessity by this aristocratic monster. You're going to regret it a lot more in about 10 seconds, he growled. Shadows beginning to writhe at his feet as vampiric power responded to his anger. Control, Naruto, Seras warned quietly beside him. Silvius smiled, revealing elongated canines. Yes, do maintain control, young prince. We wouldn't want a premature demonstration of abilities you barely understand. He gestured languidly toward the surrounding forest. My Asok, IATES are quite curious about your capabilities, you see. Some have traveled considerable distances for this evaluation. As if on cue, 6 more vampires materialized from the shadows, forming a loose circle around the clearing. Unlike the mindless attackers Naruto had faced at the temple, these moved with coordinated precision that spoke of military training. Each wore clothing that suggested D.F.F. errant regions and time periods, one in armor reminiscent of samurai tradition, another in what appeared to be European military dress from a century past, others in more modern attire that nonetheless carried distinctive cultural markers. The Conclave has representatives from all eras and regions, Silvius explained, noting Naruto's observation. Vampirism transcends national boundaries and historical periods, after all. Fascinating, Winterborn commented dryly, his weapon tracking the newcomers with practiced efficiency. I count 7 targets. Any preference for order of elimination? Silvius laughed, the sound entirely devoid of warmth. Human arrogance never ceases to amuse. Your conventional weapons pose minimal threat to nobles of our caliber, Captain Winterborn. These aren't conventional weapons, Winterborn replied evenly. Indeed not, Silvius acknowledged. Hellsing's specialized armaments are well known to our kind. Effective against lesser vampires, certainly. Against 7 noble-blooded ancients. He smiled thinly. Insufficient. Throughout the exchange, Naruto had been assessing options, calculating probabilities with the tactical precision that had earned him Jonin rank at a young age. The situation was precarious. 7 high-level vampires against their mixed force of shinobi and Hellsing operatives. Standard combat protocols would dictate strategic withdrawal and reinforcement. But something deeper than tactical analysis stirred within him. Something that recognized these creatures as both kindred and prey simultaneously. Something that heard strategies and techniques he couldn't possibly know yet somehow did. What does the Conclave want? He asked, forcing his voice to remain steady. Silvius's expression shifted to something approaching genuine interest. Direct, practical, good. He straightened slightly. The Conclave requires verification of your identity and assessment of your development. Alucard was significant in our hierarchy. His return represents both opportunity and potential catastrophe. I'm not Alucard, Naruto stated firmly. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. Semantics, Silvius dismissed. The soul remembers even when the conscious mind does not. The power recognizes itself. His gaze sharpened. Which brings us to the purpose of this encounter. A demonstration is required. I'm not performing tricks on command, Naruto replied coldly. Silvius smiled again, more predatory this time. Oh, but you will. Whether by choice or necessity remains to be seen. He raised one hand in an elegant gesture. Instantly, the surrounding vampires launched into coordinated action. 2 disappeared in blurs of movement, reappearing behind the Anbu flanking positions. Another materialized directly before Winterborn, moving to neutralize the most obvious threat. Two more engaged Seras with synchronized attacks that forced her into defensive maneuvers. The last, a massive figure in ornate armor, charged directly at Naruto with speed that would have been impossible to track with human eyes. Time seemed to slow as Naruto's perception accelerated. He could see every movement with crystalline clarity. Winterborn, smoothly sidestepping his attacker while firing a weapon that dispensed not bullets but compressed silver particles, Seras flowing between her opponents with a fighting style that combined Anbu Tekken IQs with movements Naruto somehow recognized from another lifetime, the Anbu operatives deploying specialized jutsu against enemies too fast for conventional combat. And the armored giant approaching him, sword raised for a strike that would cleave an ordinary human in half. Instinct took over. Naruto didn't dodge, he stood his ground, allowing the massive blade to complete its arc directly toward his shoulder. At the last possible instant, his body dissolved into a swarm of shadows and bats that flowed around the blade like smoke, reforming behind his attacker. Too slow, Naruto commented, surprising himself with the casual arrogance in his voice. The armored vampire whirled with impressive speed despite his bulk, eyes widening at the transformation he'd just witnessed. The mist form already, impossible for a fledgling. Quote, Naruto didn't bother correcting the terminology. Instead, he launched a counterattack, not with the shadow transformation that had emerged at the temple, but with a precisely calculated Rasengan enhanced with swirling shadows that pulsed with vampiric energy. The spiraling sphere struck the vampire's armored chest with devastating force, the combined Shin Obi technique and vampiric power tearing through ancient metal like tissue paper. The vampire's expression transformed from battle rage to shock as the attack continued through his torso, shredding dead flesh and bone with equal efficiency. Impossible, he gasped as his body began to disintegrate. Only Alucard himself could. Whatever he meant to say dissolved with his body, leaving only Deuce Chi-motes dancing in the slanting sunlight. Silence fell across the clearing for a heartbeat as all combatants registered what had just occurred. Naruto himself stood momentarily stunned. The integratio N of his signature jutsu with vampiric power had been instinctive, not calculated, and the devastating result exceeded his expectations. Sylvius's expression revealed genuine surprise for the first time. Most illuminating, he murmured. The momentary pause shattered as combat resumed with increased intensity. The remaining vampires abandoned coordinated tactics for all-out assault, clearly recognizing that their evaluation had transformed into a genuine battle for survival. Naruto found himself moving with impossible speed and precision, each motion guided by dual instincts, the shinobi's T-rained responses and the vampire's primal hunting patterns. Shadow clones materialized around him, each exhibiting the same crimson eyes and enhanced capabilities as the original, multiplying the threat he presented exponentially. Across the clearing, Seras had abandoned all pretense of standard Anbu techniques. Her right arm had transformed into something monstrous, a writhing mass of shadows and eyes that tore through one of her opponents with horrific efficiency. Her movements blurred even to Naruto's enhanced perception, leaving trails of destruction in her wake. Winterborn proved equally lethal, if more conventional. His specialized weapons dispensed what Naruto now recognized as blessed silver particulates, a substance that caused vampire flesh to decay on contact. The Hellsing CER moved with the precision of decades of experience, each shot placed with surgical accuracy despite the chaotic battlefield. The Anbu team, despite being outmatched in raw power, contributed with specialized sealing techniques that temporarily immobilized one vampire long enough for Seras to eliminate it. Within minutes that felt like hours, the clearing had transformed from pristine forest to devastated battlefield. 4 of the 7 vampires lay destroyed, reduced to dust or dismembered beyond regeneration. The remaining 3, including Sylvius himself, had regrouped near the ancient oak. Their earlier confidence replaced by wary calculation. Enough, Sylvius called out, raising a hand in a gesture that was half command, half surrender. The demonstration is complete. Naruto held his position, shadow clones arrayed around him in attack formation. Blood dripped from a shallow wound on his forearm, already healing, where one vampire had managed to score a hit with an ornate dagger. The injury should have weakened him, Instead, it had only fueled the hunger that now roared through his system, demanding satisfaction. 6 people dead at our outpost, he replied coldly. I don't think we're even close to enough. Silvius's expression tightened. Those deaths were regrettable but necessary. A test that you have now definitively passed. The conclave will be most interested in the results. I don't give a damn about your conclave, Naruto growled. Shadows writhed more intensely around his feet, responding to his rage. You attacked my people. Politics, Silvius dismissed. Inevitable when power structures shift. Surely Alucard would understand. My name, Naruto interrupted, each word precise and deadly, is Naruto Uzumaki. And I'm not interested in vampire politics. Something shifted in Silvius's expression, calculation giving way to genuine concern. You truly don't remember, do you? The traditions, the hierarchies, the ancient pacts that govern our kind. I remember enough, Naruto replied, memories not his own flickering at the edges of his consciousness, battles fought centuries ago, enemies dispatched, oaths sworn and broken. Enough to know that attacking innocence earns only one response. Silvius straightened, aristocratic pride reasserting itself. The conclave extends formal recognition of your status, Naruto Uzumaki, heir to Alucard's legacy. We offer alliance and guidance in managing your transition and establishing your rightful place in our society. The offer hung in the air, unexpectedly formal amid the destruction surrounding them. For a moment, Naruto felt the pull of it, the acknowledgement of this new facet of his identity, the promise of answers to questions he'd barely begun to formulate. Then he remembered the why. Ong Chunan's lifeless eyes staring at the sky, her throat torn open. 6 lives ended as a test. Here's my counter-offer, he stated flatly. Leave Fire Country immediately. Inform your conclave the Hidden Leaf Village and its allies are off limits to vampire activity of any kind. Any further incursions will be met with immediate and permanent elimination. Winterborn shifted beside him, perhaps surprised by the diplomatic approach after the intensity of combat. Seras remained utterly still, her transformed arm gradually returning to human appearance as she watched the exchange with unreadable eyes. Silvius studied Naruto for a long moment before inclining his head slightly. I shall convey your position to the conclave. But understand this, young prince, what has begun cannot be undone. Your awakening changes everything, for your village, for our kind, for the balance that has maintained peace between worlds for centuries. I'm not responsible for your politics, Naruto countered. But you are, Silvius insisted. By simply existing, you have become the focal point of forces beyond your comprehension. Forces that will not be denied merely because you wish to ignore them. His crimson eyes shifted to Seras. Your fledgling understands this truth, even if she hasn't shared it with you. Seras's expression remained impassive, but Naruto sensed a tension in her that hadn't been present before. We're done here, Naruto declared, gesturing for his team to maintain combat readiness. Take your survivors and go. For a moment, it seemed Silvius might argue further. Then, with formal precision that bordered on theatrical, he bowed deeply. Until we meet again, Naruto Uzumaki. The conclave will be watching your development with great interest. With that cryptic farewell, the remaining vampires dissolved into mist that scattered on the evening breeze, leaving the clearing eerily silent save for the distant calls of returning birds. Naruto remained motionless for several heartbeats, extending his senses to confirm their departure. Only when he was certain they had truly withdrawn did he allow the shadow clones to dissipate and the vampiric power to recede beneath his conscious control. Well, Winterborn commented dryly, holstering his weapon with practiced efficiency, that was informative. 4 confirmed eliminations, Seras reported. All business despite the lingering darkness swirling around her recently transformed arm. No casualties on our side, though Boar Mask sustained minor injuries. The Anbu in question waved off concern, already applying field dressings to a slash across his shoulder. Nothing serious, Captain. Naruto nodded acknowledgement, his mind racing with implications. The battle had revealed capabilities he hadn't known he possessed, transformations and techniques that had emerged instinctively under pressure. More disturbing was how natural they had felt, as if his body remembered skills his conscious mind had never learned. Dr. Teps will be collecting readings, Winterborn noted, activating a communication device unlike anything in standard shinobi equipment. "She'll want a full debrief on the combat dynamics. First we secure the area and treat injuries," Naruto countered, deliberately reasserting command structure. "Data collection is secondary to team safety." Something that might Vebin approval flickered across the Hellsing officer's weathered features before he nodded sharply. "Agreed. Standard containment protocols for vampire dust and residual energy." As the team implemented post-combat procedures, Naruto found himself drawn to the ancient oak where Sylvius had made his final stand. Something about the vampire's parting words nagged at him, the absolute certainty that Naruto's awakening had irrevocably altered some cosmic balance. He wasn't entirely wrong, Seras commented quietly, appearing beside him with the silent grace that marked her as both Anbu and vampire. "Your existence does change everything." Naruto studied her, noting the subtle signs of vampiric nature that he could now recognize, the too perfect stillness, the eyes that reflected light differently than human eyes. The carefully measured breathing that served appearance rather than necessity. "What aren't you telling me?" he asked directly. Seras's expression remained carefully neutral. "Many things. Some because you aren't ready to hear them. Others because I don't have the authority to explain." "Authority from who?" "The Hokage. Integra Hellsing. This mysterious conclave." Frustration edged his voice. "I'm tired of being treated like a chess piece everyone wants to control." "Not control," Seras corrected gently. "Guide. Protect. There's a difference." "Is there?" Naruto challenged. "From where I stand, everyone seems to have plans for what I should be, based on who I supposedly was in another lifetime." Seras was silent for a moment, her gaze distant. "I remember him," she finally said, voice soft with something like nostalgia. "Alucard. My master. Monstrous and magnificent. Terrifying and loyal. A creature of contradictions who chose service when he could have ruled. Who found purpose in protecting the very humans he could have dominated." The description stirred something deep within Naruto, recognition of truths that resonated on levels beyond conscious thought. "You think that's my destiny?" he asked, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from his voice. "To become him again?" "No," Seras replied with unexpected firmness. "I think your destiny is to become something entirely new." Naruto Uzumaki with Alucard's power but his own heart. His own choices. She met his gaze directly. "That's what terrifies them all. Integra, the conclave, perhaps even the Hokage herself. The unknown quantity you represent." Before Naruto could respond, Winterborn approached, his expression grim. "We've got a situation, Doctor." Tepsa's monitoring station detected Anomalu's energy signatures converging on Konoha from multiple vectors. Vampire signatures, but different from what we encountered here. A diversion, Naruto realized immediately. This entire confrontation was a distraction. Tactical assessment suggests coordinated action by a different faction, Winterborn confirmed. Possibly exploiting the power vacuum created by the Conclave's focus on you. Cold dread settled in Naruto's stomach. "We need to move, now." "Agreed," Seras said, already signaling the Anbu team. "But this doesn't make sense. Vampire factions rarely cooperate, and never without extensive negotiation. This level of coordination suggests." "Suggests what?" Naruto demanded when she trailed off. Seras's expression darkened. "A unifying force. Something, or someone, powerful. Enough to compel multiple factions toward a common goal." "Speculation can wait," Winterborn interjected. "Priority is reaching Konoha before whatever's heading there." Naruto nodded sharply. "Our 80 calculating fastest routes and forming contingency plans." As the team prepared for rapid deployment, however, his thoughts kept circling back to Seras's words and the future they implied, not a return to what had been, but the creation of something entirely new. Whatever awaited them in Konoha, whatever plans others might have for his awakening power, one thing was becoming increasingly clear. The path forward would be defined not by who he had been in another life, but by the choices he made in this one. With that resolution firming in his mind, Naruto led his team toward home, racing against enemies unknown and a future unwritten. Integra Hellsing stood at the window of her assigned quarters in the Hokage Tower, watching the sunset paint Konoha in shades of gold and crimson. He view was objectively beautiful, so different from London's urban sprawl or the stark military efficiency of the Hellsing compound in the Land of Iron. Yet her attention wasn't on the scenery but on the reports spread across the antique desk behind her. Surveillance data, historical analyses, medical evaluations, all focused on one subject: Naruto Uzumaki, the unlikely vessel for Alucard's reincarnated soul. A soft knock at the door interrupted her contemplation. "Enter," she called, not turning from the window. The door opened to admit Drive Mirai Tepes, her usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled from field operations. "Preliminary combat data has been transmitted, Seras Integra. The results are remarkable." "Quantify." "Remarkable," Integra requested, still gazing at the darkening sky. "Power output exceeding Class A parameters by approximately 230%. Transformation capabilities manifesting at Stage 3 development despite recent awakening. Integration of Shinobi Tekken IQs with vampiric abilities in ways our models didn't predict." Dr. Tepes hesitated briefly. He eliminated a noble blood vampire with modified Rasengan technique. The implications for power synthesis are unprecedented. And his control, better than anticipated, though far from complete. The Nine Tails chakra appears to provide a stabilizing framework for the vampiric powers, almost as if his lifelong experience managing one form of dangerous energy created pathways for controlling another. Integra finally turned from the window, her expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. And his psychological response: bloodlust, dominance impulses, present but managed, Drive Tepes reported. He prioritized team safety and tactical objectives over personal gratification. Most notably, he offered diplomatic resolution when outright elimination was within his capabilities. A slight smile curved Integra's lips. Diplomatic resolution. How very unlike Alucard. Indeed, Drive Tepes agreed, though Captain Winterbourne noted that the terms of said diplomacy were delivered with quite Alucard-like absolute certainty. Integra moved to the desk, studying a particular document. Th focused attention, an ancient scroll carefully preserved in a specialized container. The faded text was written in a language predating modern shinobi nations, with illustrations depicting a figure in red surrounded by shadows and bats. "History repeats itself with variations," she murmured. "The question is whether those variations represent improvement or degradation." Dr. Tepes approached cautiously. "The Covenant, Seras Integra. Do you truly believe he'll accept it?" "Unlikely, in its traditional form," Integra acknowledged. "This incarnation was raised with different values, different loyalties. The subservience that Alucard accepted, even embraced, would be anathema to Naruto Uzumaki." "Then what is our purpose here?" Dr. Tepes asked, genuine confusion evident in her voice. "If the Covenant cannot be renewed." "I said the traditional form would be unacceptable," Integra interrupted smoothly. "That doesn't preclude adaptation, evolution." Her fingers traced the ancient text with surprising gentleness. "The essence of the Covenant was never really about control, you know. It was about purpose, direction, preventing a being of incalculable power from succumbing to the worst aspects of his nature." Understanding dawned in Dr. Tepes' expression. "You're not seeking to bind him. You're seeking alliance, partnership," Integra corrected, "mutual benefit based on shared objectives rather than mystical compulsion." She closed the container with deliberate care. Alucard served the Hellsing family because, at his core, he recognized the necessity of constraints on power. "I believe Naruto Uzumaki understands this principle even more deeply, given his history." Before Drive Tepes could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the village, high, wailing sounds that cut rough the peaceful evening with urgent warning. Integra moved to the window again, her posture straightening as she scanned the darkening skies. "It seems our theoretical discussions must yield to practical concerns. Activate all Hellsing personnel and deploy emergency containment protocols." "Without Konoha authorization?" Dr. Tepes questioned, already moving toward communications equipment. "We are guests in their village," Integra acknowledged. "But this," she gestured toward the northern wall, where unusual mist was beginning to coalesce despite the clear evening, "this is our specialty. The Hokage will understand the necessity." As Dr. Tepes hurried to implement orders, Integra remained at the window, watching the unnatural fog spread with calculating eyes. "Come then," she murmured to unseen enemies. Let us see what manner of vampire dares attack with Hellsing present. And perhaps, she added silently, let us see what manner of King Naruto Uzumaki might become when his village faces the very threat he represents. The test had begun in earnest. The results would determine the future of not one but two worlds long kept separate, the shinobi nations and the hidden vampire societies that had observed them for centuries. As darkness fell completely over Konoha, Integra Hellsing prepared for war, wondering whether the reincarnated vampire king would prove ally or adversary in the battles to come. History suggested the latter. Hope, an emotion Integra rarely indulged, suggested the former. Time, as always, would reveal the truth. Chapter 2 End Chapter 3, Blood Memory. Naruto dreamed of castles, not the feudal fortresses of the Land of Iron, nor the ornate palaces of the daimyo, but enormous stone monoliths perched on jagged mountainsides, their towers stabbing at unfamiliar skies like accusatory fingers. Their architecture belonged to no nation he recognized, all sharp angles and flying buttresses, gargoyles leering from rain-slick cornices, and impossibly tall windows filled with colored glass depicting scenes of violence and divinity. He strode through endless corridors lined with armor he'd never seen, weapons he couldn't name, and portraits of stern-faced nobility whose eyes seemed to follow his progress. His footsteps echoed on stone floors covered with intricately patterned carpets in rich crimson and gold. In the dream, this place was home. A prison, a kingdom, all simultaneously. Master. The voice came from behind him, feminine and deferential. He turned to see a young woman with blonde hair and bright blue eyes, Seras, yet not Seras. Her clothing was strange, a yellow uniform unlike anything from the shinobi nations, and her expression held none of the Anbu captain's carefully maintained professional detachment. Police girl, he replied, the unfamiliar term emerging naturally from his lips. You should be resting. The dawn approaches. I wanted to ask about the mission, Dream Seras replied. The Vatican's 13th Division will be handled. He interrupted, his voice deeper, accented differently. The Catholics have overstepped their bounds. Again, Integra has authorized extreme prejudice. His mouth curved into a smile that felt wrong, too wide, too filled with anticipation for violence. It will be entertaining. The scene dissolved, reforming into a battlefield littered with bodies. The sky above burned crimson and black, smoke rising from devastated buildings. Before him stood a man in priestly garments, wielding bayonets that gleamed with unnatural light. Monster. The priest spat, his accent thick and unfamiliar. Ye shall be purged in righteous fire. Monster. He heard himself laugh, the sound echoing unnaturally. I've been called worse by better men than you, Judas Priest. His body dissolved into shadows and bats, reforming around a massive wound that should have been fatal. He felt no pain, only escalating excitement as blood, his own and others, soaked into the ground beneath his feet. Come then, he challenged, drawing weapons that materialized from his very clothing, massive firearms unlike anything in the shinobi world. Show me if your god can truly kill a monster. The scene shifted again. A young woman with platinum blonde hair stood before a desk, her back military straight despite her youth. Behind her, a portrait of a stern-faced man dominated the wall. Oh, you know what my father told me about vampires before he died? She asked, her voice betraying no emotion. I cannot presume to know the wisdom Arthur Hellsing imparted to his daughter, he replied. The formal words at odds with the amusement coloring his tone. She turned, fixing him with blue eyes too old for her young face. He said they were tools. Powerful, dangerous tools that required proper handling. Her chin lifted slightly. He also said you were different. That you chose your chains. Did I? He found himself asking, genuine curiosity replacing amusement. Or were they simply preferable to the alternative? Does it matter? The young Integra, for that's who she must be, asked with surprising insight. Choice made under duress is still choice. Service freely given, even when options are limited, still has meaning. He felt himself bow, deeply and with a flourish that was half mocking, half sincere. As you say, my master. The dream fragmented into a kaleidoscope of mages and sensations. Battles across centuries, enemies destroyed, masters served. Blood consumed from willing and unwilling sources. Transformations into mist, shadow, beasts. the weight of centuries pressing down like a physical burden. Throughout it all, a hunger that never truly abated, only temporarily receded. A quest for worthy adversaries that rarely found satisfaction. And beneath everything, a loneliness so profound it transcended conscious acknowledgement. Naruto woke with a strangled gasp, bolt upright in his bed, sweat-soaked sheets tangled around his legs. Pre-dawn light filtered weakly through his apartment window, casting everything in muted gray. His heart hammered against his ribs, an oddly human reaction for what he was becoming. The dreams had grown more vivid, more detailed. Each night since the vampire attack on Konoha 3 days prior. Not just dreams, memories. Alucard's memories, filtering through whatever metaphysical connection linked their souls across time and worlds. He pressed the heels of his palms against his eyes, trying to separate his identity from the lingering impressions of another life. The line felt increasingly blurry, certain mannerisms and thoughts bleeding through despite his best efforts to maintain distinction. "You're Naruto Uzumaki," he muttered aloud, voice rough from sleep. "Konoha shinobi, not some ancient vampire king." The affirmation helped, but less than it had yesterday. The day before, it had felt like unshakable truth. Today, it felt like wishful simplification. A soft knock at his door interrupted the spiral of his thoughts. He didn't need enhanced senses to recognize the visitor's identity. Her chakra signature had become as familiar as his own in recent days. "Come in, Seras," he called, running fingers thr. Out sleep tousled hair in a futile attempt at normality. She entered with characteristic efficiency, dressed in standard Jonin attire rather than Anbu gear. The official explanation for her constant presence was specialized training assignment, though most of Konoha's elite had undoubtedly pieced together that something more significant was occurring. One look at his face and her professional mask slipped, genuine concern replacing formal distance. "The dreams again," Naruto nodded, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "Castles in Romania. Battles with someone called the Judas Priest. A young Integra talking about choices and chains." He rubbed his temples, where a dull ache had taken up residence. "They're getting more specific, more coherent." Seras closed the door behind her, moving to open the curtains wider. Unlike many fictional representations of vampires, neither of them suffered true harm from sunlight, though Naruto had discovered that bright midday sun created a persistent discomfort like a mild sunburn. "That's to be expected," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "The awakening follows patterns. First physical manifestations, then abilities, then memories. And then," Naruto pressed, "what comes after the memories?" Seras hesitated, arranging her thoughts before answering. "Integration, theoretically. The point where past and present identities find equilibrium. Theoretically, your situation is unique," she admitted. "Most reincarnations don't involve crossing between worlds. The presence of the 9 tails further complicates matters." She studied him with clinical detachment that couldn't quite mask deeper concern. "How's the hunger today?" Naruto grimaced. The persistent thirst had become his constant companion, a background raving that intensified during stress or combat. The Hellsing organization had provided specially formulated blood capsules that took the edge off, but true satiation remained elusive. "Manageable," he answered, which was mostly true. "The fox's chakra helps, and your control of the abilities." In answer, Naruto held out his hand. Shadows gathered around his fingers, flowing like liquid darken before solidifying into the shape of a small wolf. The shadow construct prowled across his palm with lifelike movements before dissolving back into formlessness. "Improving," he said, allowing the shadows to dissipate completely. "The smaller manifestations are almost instinctive now. It's the larger transformations that still feel foreign." Seras nodded approvingly. "You're progressing faster than anyone anticipated." Seras Integra is quite impressed, though she'd rather drink poison than admit it. The mention of the Hellsing director brought a frown to Naruto's face. In the chaos following the vampire attack, Integra had established herself as a commanding presence, deploying Hellsing personnel with ruthless efficiency while coordinating seamlessly with Konoha's defense forces. The cooperation had saved lives. Certainly, but it had also demonstrated her organization's capabilities in ways that left village leadership uneasy. "Speaking of our distinguished guest," Naruto said, rising to pull on a black shirt that had become his preferred attire since the awakening. What's on today's agenda? More tests with Dr. Teps. Another round of tactical consultations. Actually, Lady Tsunade has requested your presence at a special council meeting, Seras replied. The Hellsing delegation will be present, along with representatives from Anbu, Intelligence, and the Jonin commander. Politics, Naruto groaned. Just what I need. Politics is inevitable when power structures shift, Seras commented, unconsciously echoing Sylvius's words from days earlier. Catching herself, she added, though I imagine you'd prefer a straightforward mission right now. That was an understatement. The tension of being constantly observed, analyzed, and discussed had Naruto itching for action, preferably something that would take him far from Konoha's walls and the weight of expectation that had settled over him since the awakening. What time is this meeting? He asked, already dreading the answer. 1 hour, Seras replied, her tone suggesting she'd fought for even that much preparation time. Seras Integra insisted on your presence despite Lady Tsunade's concerns about your adjustment period. The diplomatic phrasing made Naruto snort. You mean despite concerns I might go full Vampire King in the middle of the council chamber? Something like that, Seras admitted with a small smile. Though personally, I think they're more concerned about your diplomatic skills than your control. Because I told the conclave representatives to get lost or get dusted. Naruto shrugged. Memories of the confrontation still sharp. Seemed like reasonable options at the time. Reasonable for a shinobi, perhaps. Seras moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. Less so for someone navigating supernatural politics that span centuries. I'm not interested in vampire politics, Naruto stated flatly, a refrain he'd repeated countless times since the awakening. Seras's expression turned serious. That's like saying you're not interested in gravity, Naruto. Your interest, or lack thereof, doesn't negate its effect on your existence. She opened the door. I'll wait outside while you prepare. Try to dress, authoritatively. The door closed behind her before Naruto could formulate a suitable retort. With a sigh, he headed for the shower, trying not to think about the crimson tint that would manifest in his eyes if his concentration slipped during the meeting. Just another day in the life of a shinobi turned vampire king. The council chamber hummed with tense energy as Naruto entered, conversations dropping to murmurs before resuming at carefully modulated volumes. The room had been arranged differently than normal, the standard U-shaped configuration replaced by a circular arrangement that eliminated hierarchical positioning. A political statement in furniture form, Naruto realized. No head of the table meant no clear power center. Tsunade sat with Shizune and Shikaku Nara, the Jonin commander's usually relaxed posture notably absent as he studied documents spread before him. Across from them, Integra Hellsing commanded attention without effort, flanked by Captain Winterbourne and Dr. Teps. Anbu Commander Dragon, his porcelain mask in place despite the indoor setting, occupied another section with 2 senior captains whose identities Naruto could guess but wouldn't confirm. Ibiki Morino represented Intelligence Division, his scarred face set in its perpetual frown. And in a surprising addition, Hiyashi Hyuga sat with perfect posture, his pale eyes revealing nothing of his thoughts. Seras directed Naruto to an empty chair positioned between the Konoha and Hellsing delegations, another political statement, though wet. Where it placed him as bridge or buffer remained unclear. Captain Uzumaki, Tsunade acknowledged formally. Thank you for joining us. The title rather than his name established the meeting's tone immediately. This wasn't a gathering of familiar associates but a formal council with protocol to maintain. Naruto inclined his head respectfully, conscious of multiple gazes assessing his appearance, demeanor, and the subtle indicators of his transformed nature. I've been briefed on the agenda, he stated, matching Tsunade's formality. How may I assist? Tsunade's lips twitched almost imperceptibly. Appreciation for his unexpected diplomacy. Seras Integra has presented several proposals regarding the current situation. Before we proceed further, a comprehensive understanding of recent events seems prudent. Translation. We need everyone on the same page about what the hell is happening with you. Of course, Naruto agreed. Though I believe Captain Victoria and Dr. Teps have provided detailed reports. Clinical observation differs from personal experience, Integra interjected, her crisp accent cutting through the careful diplomatic phrasing. Your perspective on the awakening would be valuable context for the proposals under consideration. Put on the spot, Naruto considered his response carefully. The various factions represented needed different information, tactical capabilities for Anbu, security implications for intelligence, political ramifications for village leadership. And through it all, he needed to maintain the delicate balance between transparency and self-preservation. The process began at the abandoned temple. He began, deciding that chronological order offered the most neutral approach. Contact with vampire entities triggered what Captain Victoria describes as an awakening of abilities that were apparently dormant since birth. These abilities include enhanced physical capabilities, sensory perception beyond normal parameters, and various transformative techniques. Transformative in what sense? Ibiki asked sharply. Shadow manipulation, mist form, limited shapeshifting, Naruto replied, keeping his tone matter of fact despite the fantastical nature of the abilities described. Along with the physical changes, I've experienced memory transfer, for lack of a better term. Dreams and flashbacks to events from another life. Alucard's life. Integra clarified unnecessarily. Naruto inclined his head slightly. Apparently so. And the hunger? Dr. Tepes inquired, her scientific curiosity evident. How would you characterize its progression? The directness of the question created a momentary silence around the table. The euphemistic thirst, or craving, had been the preferred terminology in previous discussions. Persistent but manageable, Naruto answered truthfully. The blood capsules help. The Nine Tails chakra provides additional buffering. But it's constant drive. Tepes pressed. A background need that intensifies under specific conditions. Yes. Hiyashi Hyuga spoke for the first time, his voice precise and formal. These vampire entities that attacked our border outpost and later the village itself. What is their relationship to Captain Uzumaki's condition? Integra leaned forward slightly, the movement drawing all attention. The vampire world operates on strict hierarchies based on bloodline, power, and age. Alucard, the being whose soul appears to have reincarnated in Captain Uzumaki, stood at the apex of that hierarchy for centuries. His apparent return represents a fundamental disruption to established power structures. Quote, so these attacks were, what? Competitors eliminating a rival? Shikaku asked, skepticism evident. Some, yes, Integra acknowledged. Others were likely attempts to establish alliance or dominance patterns. The supernatural community responds to power vacuums with remarkable speed. And Konoha is caught in the middle, Tsunade concluded, her expression hardening. Which brings us to your proposals, Sir Integra. Integra nodded to Dr. Tepes, who activated a small device that projected a three-dimensional map onto the center of the table. The display showed Fire Country and surrounding territories, with pulsing red markers at specific locations. We've identified 17 vampire nests within striking distance of Konoha, Integra explained. Most are small, containing 3 to 7 entities of varying power levels. However, 3 larger concentrations exist that pose significant security concerns. The map zoomed in on these locations, displaying detailed topographical information. The Hellsing organization proposes a joint operation to neutralize these threats, Integra continued. Our personnel have specialized training and equipment for vampire elimination. Combined with Konoha's shinobi capabilities, we could secure a significant buffer zone around the village. At what cost? Anbu Commander Dragon asked, his mask rendering his tone even more inscrutable than usual. The Hellsing organization doesn't strike me as a charitable institution. A thin smile curved Integra's lips. Perceptive. No, we're not offering our services without compensation. We propose an exchange of value. Which is? Tsunade prompted when Integra paused. Access to Captain Uzumaki for training, research, and potential covenant establishment, Integra stated bluntly. Along with a formal alliance between Hellsing and Konoha for ongoing supernatural threat management. The proposal landed with the subtle impact of an explosive tag. Naruto felt multiple gazes shift to him. Measuring his reaction. Captain Uzumaki is not a commodity to be bartered, Tsunade stated, her tone dangerously calm. Indeed not, Integra agreed smoothly. He is, however, A strategic asset whose development will proceed more effectively with specialized guidance. Guidance only Hellsing can provide. And this covenant? Shikaku inquired, his sharp mind clearly catching the term's significance. What exactly does that entail? Integra's gaze shifted to Naruto, studying him over the rims of her circular glasses. Traditionally, a blood oath binding. Alucard's service to the Hellsing family. A voluntary arrangement that channeled his power toward defined purposes rather than indiscriminate destruction. Voluntary servitude, Ibiki translated flatly. You're proposing our shinobi enter into magical servitude to a foreign organization. I'm proposing a mutually beneficial arrangement based on historical precedent, Integra corrected, unmoved by the accusation. Though I recognize that the traditional form may require adaptation, given current circumstances. Throughout this exchange, Naruto had maintained careful neutrality, conscious of the political currents swirling around him. Now, however, he leaned forward, drawing attention. Sir Integra, he said, deliberately using her preferred formal address, you speak of this covenant as essential. Yet you've provided limited information about its actual function or necessity. Before anyone considers such an arrangement, I believe more transparency is required. Integra's expression revealed nothing, but something like approval flickered in her eyes. A fair observation. The covenant served multiple purposes, both practical and mystical. It provided direction for power that, unguided, tended toward chaos. It established boundaries for abilities that, unconstrained, could threaten indiscriminate destruction. Most importantly, it satisfied the psychological need for purpose that drives beings of great power. Quote, and why would this be necessary for Captain Uzumaki? Hiyashi Hyuga asked, his tone suggesting he already suspected the answer. He has purpose as a Konoha shinobi. He has boundaries established by his oath to the village. Because those purposes and boundaries were established for a human shinobi, Integra replied simply. What Captain Uzumaki is becoming transcends those categories. The hunger alone creates imperatives that exist outside conventional moral frameworks. Without structured guidance, reconciling these competing drives becomes problematic. The clinical description made Naruto sound like a bomb waiting to detonate. He bristled internally but kept his expression neutral, recognizing the tactical nature of the conversation. I've managed the Nine Tails influence since childhood, he pointed out. This seems like a similar challenge. Similar but distinct, drive. Teps interjected. Biju chakra operates on principles fundamentally compatible with human physiology. Despite its corrosive effects, vampire nature represents a more comprehensive physiological and psychological transformation, affecting not just power expression but core identity constructs. Before Naruto could respond, Hiyashi Hyuga spoke again, his focus on Integra rather than the scientific explanation. You mentioned potential covenant establishment as part of your proposed exchange. The qualifier suggests alternatives exist. Integra inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the perceptive observation. The traditional covenant was specific to Alucard and the Hellsing family of his world. Our research suggests adaptations may be possible, perhaps even preferable, given Captain Uzumaki's unique circumstances. Such as, Tsunade pressed, a shared covenant, Integra proposed. Distributed authority between Hellsing and Konoha, with Captain Uzumaki maintaining greater autonomy than the original arrangement permitted. The specific mechanics would require research and experimentation. The clinical phrasing made Naruto sound like a laboratory specimen rather than a person with agency. He'd remained silent longer than his nature typically allowed, absorbing the various perspectives and proposals. Now, however, patience reached its limit. I appreciate everyone's concern for my development, he stated, careful to keep his tone even despite growing frustration. But I'm not signing any blood oaths or entering any covenants until I fully understand what I'm becoming. The dreams, memories, provide fragments, but not the complete picture. Dr. Teps straightened, her scientific interest clearly piqued. You're experiencing comprehensive memory transfer, beyond combat capabilities and power manifestation. Increasingly detailed, Naruto confirmed. Locations, conversations, relationships, though fragmented and nonlinear. Fascinating, the doctor murmured, making notes on a small tablet. The integration process is proceeding faster than theoretical models predicted. Which brings us to another proposal, Integra interjected smoothly. Our intelligence suggests the existence of historical records pertaining to vampire presence in this world, specifically underground chambers beneath an ancient shrine approximately 40 kilometers northeast of Konoha. The announcement created a ripple of surprise around the table. Tsunade's eyes narrowed slightly. And you're only mentioning this now because confirmation was only received yesterday, Integra replied without hesitation. My organization maintains certain information networks that operate independently of official channels. Spies, Naruto translated mentally. The Hellsing organization clearly had assets embedded throughout the shinobi nations, a revelation that would normally create diplomatic tension. Under current circumstances, however, the potential value of the information outweighed protocol concerns. What kind of records? He asked, genuine curiosity overriding political caution. According to our source, extensive documentation of vampire presence in this world dating back centuries, Integra answered. Including specific references to interactions between vampire nobility and early shinobi clans. This revelation created a moment of stunned silence. If true, it suggested a hidden dimension to shinobi history had been systematically erased or concealed from standard records. I propose a joint expedition, Integra continued into the silence. Hellsing personnel for supernatural expertise, Konoha shinobi for territorial knowledge, and Captain Uzumaki, whose unique perspective may prove valuable in interpreting the findings. Naruto found himself unexpectedly intrigued by the proposal. The D.'s jointed memories provided tantalizing glimpses of Alucard's existence but lacked contextual framework. Historical records might fill crucial gaps in his understanding, particularly regarding how society integrated with the shinobi world. I volunteer, he stated before Tsunade could respond. This could provide essential context for everything that's happening. Tsunade's expression suggested she'd anticipated his reaction and wasn't entirely pleased with it. The potential intelligence value is significant, she acknowledged reluctantly. However, security considerations are paramount. Captain Uzumaki's condition remains classified at the highest level. A small team then, Integra suggested. Captain Winterbourne for Hellsing, Captain Victoria as liaison, perhaps one additional Konoha specialist with relevant expertise. Hiyashi Hyuga cleared his throat deliberately. If I may suggest, Hokage-sama, my daughter Hinata possesses certain qualities that might prove beneficial to this expedition. The recommendation surprised everyone, Naruto most of all. Hiyashi Hyuga was notoriously protective of his clan's secrets and his daughter's deployment. For him to volunteer her for a mission involving supernatural elements was unexpected, to say the least. Explain, Tsunade requested, clearly sharing Naruto's confusion. Hiyashi's expression remained impassive, but something-like calculation flickered in his pale eyes. Recent clan research has identified unique properties in Hinata's blood composition, properties specifically reactive to supernatural entities. Combined with her Byakugan, these characteristics could provide valuable security measures for the team. Dr. Tepes leaned forward, scientific curiosity evident. Reactive in what sense, Lord Hyuga? Neutralizing or amplifying? Depending on application method, Hiyashi replied with deliberate vagueness. Our research is ongoing, but preliminary findings suggest significant potential. Naruto studied the Hyuga clan head with newfound interest. The carefully measured revelation suggested Hiyashi had been aware of supernatural entities, specifically vampires, long before the current crisis emerged. It also implied that Hinata possessed abilities beyond standard Hyuga capabilities, abilities her father had kept carefully concealed until now. Integra and Tsunade exchanged a look that communicated volumes without words, mutual recognition that Hiyashi's offer represented a significant political move with multiple potential interpretations. I have no objection to Hinata Hyuga's inclusion, Integra stated finally. Assuming she's been briefed on Captain Uzumaki's condition, she will be appropriately informed, Hiyashi assured with perfect diplomatic neutrality. Tsunade's lips pressed into a thin line as she weighed options. Finally, she nodded sharply. Very well. Captain Uzumaki will lead a 4-person team to investigate these underground chambers. Captain Victoria, Captain Winterbourne, and Hinata Hyuga will comprise the team. Standard reconnaissance protocols apply. Observation and information gathering only. No engagement with hostile entities without explicit authorization. The formal mission parameters established, the meeting shifted to logistical details, departure schedules, communication protocols, equipment requirements. Throughout the discussion, Naruto found his attention repeatedly drawn to Hiyashi Hyuga, whose carefully composed features revealed nothing of his motivations. Why volunteer Hinata specifically? What unique properties did her blood possess? And how long had the Hyuga clan known about vampires? Questions without immediate answers, but perhaps the underground chambers would provide context for this unexpected development as well. As the meeting concluded, Integra approached Naruto directly, her piercing gaze assessing him with clinical precision. The memories will continue intensifying, she stated without preamble. Be prepared for increased disorientation as integration progresses. Any advice for managing that? Naruto asked, matching her directness. Meditation techniques help some, focusing on sensory anchors unique to this life. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Though in my experience, Alucard generally preferred to simply power through discomfort with sheer stubborn determination. That sounds familiar, Naruto admitted, surprising himself with the small acknowledgement of connection to his previous incarnation. Integra studied him a moment longer. You're handling this better than anticipated, Captain Uzumaki. Whether that reflects exceptional adaptability or concerning acceptance remains to be seen. With that ambiguous assessment, she departed, leaving Naruto to wonder exactly what outcome the Hellsing director actually hoped for. The shrine stood in a clearing surrounded by ancient cedar trees, their massive trunks rising like silent sentinels against the afternoon sky. Time had not been kind to the structure, roof tiles missing, wooden support beams weather-worn, stone foundation cracked and settled at uneven angles. Yet something about its presence commanded respect, a dignity that transcended physical deterioration. Naruto approached cautiously, extending his senses beyond normal parameters. The location felt significant, in ways he couldn't articulate, a resonance T vibrated through his transformed being like a tuning fork finding its perfect pitch. You feel it too, Seras observed quietly, moving to stand beside him. Not a question but a confirmation. It's like recognition, Naruto replied, struggling to articulate the sensation. As if I've been here before, even though I know I haven't. Perhaps you have, in a manner of speaking, Captain Winterbourne suggested. His weathered features revealing nothing of his thoughts as he surveyed the shrine. If vampire presence here dates back centuries, Alucard may have visited in his previous incarnation. The possibility hadn't occurred to Naruto, who had assumed the connections between worlds were recent phenomena. Could Alucard have traveled between worlds? The metaphysics of interdimensional travel weren't exactly discussed over tea, Winterbourne replied dryly. But historical records mention periods where Alucard's whereabouts were unknown to the Hellsing family for decades at a time. The information added another layer of complexity to an already bewildering situation. If Alucard had indeed visited this world in his previous existence, it might explain the ease with which his soul had found rebirth here, a pre-established connection rather than random cosmic chance. Before Naruto could pursue this line of thinking further, Hinata Hyuga approached from where she'd been examining the perimeter. Her traditional shinobi attire was supplemented with unusual equipment, vials of liquid secured in specialized holders at her waist, scrolls marked with symbols Naruto didn't recognize, and a small silver dagger sheathed at her thigh. The entrance isn't in the shrine itself, she reported, her voice soft but confident. There's a chakra distortion approximately 20 meters east, beneath that outcropping of rock. Naruto studied her with undisguised curiosity. Since joining the mission that morning, Hinata had demonstrated knowledge and capabilities at odds with his previous understanding of her abilities. Gone was the shy, hesitant girl he'd known during their academy days. In her place stood a composed young woman with precise movements and carefully measured speech. Most intriguing were the subtle reactions his vampire senses detected whenever she came near, a distinct scent unlike any other human he'd encountered, a barely perceptible disturbance in his perception of her chakra flow. And most notably, a strange calming effect on the perpetual hunger that plagued him. Your Byakugan can penetrate the concealment? Winterbourne asked, professional interest evident. Hinata nodded. The barrier uses a variation of standard genjutsu principles, but with an unusual chakra signature. My father's training focused specifically on identifying such anomalies. Another piece of evidence suggesting Hiyashi Hyuga's long-standing awareness of supernatural elements. Naruto filed the information away for later consideration as they moved toward the rock outcropping Hinata had identified. Up close, the formation appeared entirely natural, weather-worn granite with moss growing in shadowed crevices. Nothing about it suggested hidden passages or ancient secrets. The entrance mechanism is keyed to blood, Hinata stated, activating her Byakugan to study the rock face more closely. There's a receptacle carved into the stone here, she pointed to what appeared to be a natural depression in the granite, designed to channel blood through internal passages that activate the opening mechanism. Blood locks, Winterborn muttered. Typical vampire dramatics. Can you see what's beyond the entrance? Naruto asked, already suspecting the answer. Hinata frowned slightly, the veins around her eyes becoming more pronounced as she intensified her dojutsu. Partially. There's some form of interference that limits visual penetration beyond approximately 50 meters. I can see a stairway descending into a larger chamber, but details become indistinct beyond that point. Vampire constructions often incorporate metaphysical barriers against dojutsu, Winterborn explained. Standard security protocol for their more significant installations. The C.A. Sewell explanation suggested extensive Hellsing knowledge of how vampire technology interacted with shinobi capabilities, another indicator of the organization's long-term presence in this world. So we need blood to open it, Naruto summarized, eyeing the rock depression. Whose blood? Theoretically, any blood would trigger the basic mechanism, Seras replied. However, many such entrances are C.A. liberated to respond differently based on the blood's origin. Human blood might open a basic entry, while vampire blood could unlock additional passages or disable security measures. All eyes turned to Naruto, the implication clear. You want me to try first, he concluded, not bothering to phrase it as a question. Your blood has unique properties, Winterborn confirmed. The combination of vampire awakening and Jinchuriki status creates a signature unlike anything in our records. If this installation has significance to vampire history in this world, that combination might trigger specialized responses. The logic was sound, if somewhat clinical. Naruto stepped forward, drawing a kunai from his pouch. The brief hesitation before cutting his palm had nothing to do with pain, which Hi's healing factor would minimize anyway, and everything to do with the symbolic weight of the action. Using his blood to activate vampire technology represented another step toward accepting his transformed nature. With a decisive motion, he sliced his palm and held it over the depression in the rock face. Blood, darker than human blood, with a subtle iridescence visible only to enhanced senses, dripped into the hollow. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then, a low rumbling vibrated through the ground as seams appeared in the seemingly solid rock, outlining a doorway where none had been visible before. The stone parted smoothly, revealing a passage that descended into darkness. Well, Naruto commented dryly, that was appropriately dramatic. Seras smiled slightly. Vampires do appreciate their theatrics. Cool air wafted from the opening, carrying scents of age and preservation. Dust, ancient stone, and something else, something metallic and organic that stirred uncomfortable recognition in Naruto's transformed senses. Old blood, very old, preserved somehow against the ravages of time. I'll take point, he decided, creating a small flame in his palm for illumination, a basic jutsu that felt almost quaint against the backdrop of his more exotic developing abilities. The passage descended at a steep angle, stone steps worn smooth by countless footfalls over centuries. The walls were unadorned at first, simple worked stone that could have belonged to any ancient construction. As they descended further, however, distinctive patterns emerged, geometric designs interspersed with symbolic representations that tugged at Naruto's subconscious recognition. These symbols, Hinata observed, studying the increasingly elaborate wall decorations, they predate standard written language in the Five Nations. Some elements resemble early Wind Country script, but with significant differences. Vampire script, Winterborn confirmed. A standardized writing system used across various regions and historical periods. One of the few constants in their fragmented society. Can you read it? Naruto asked, glancing back at the Hellsing officer. Only specialized skull. Ours can fully translate ancient vampire script, Winterborn replied. I recognize certain ideograms, security warnings, territorial markers, basic declarations of ownership. It's claiming this territory as belonging to the Blood Court of Eternal Night, Seras added, her gaze tracking across specific symbols. A vampire faction that supposedly died out centuries ago. Naruto filed away the information as they continued downward. After approximately 100 steps, the passage leveled out into a small antechamber. 3 archways led in different directions, each marked with distinct symbols above the entrance. Hinata, Naruto prompted, gesturing toward the options. She activated her Byakugan again, studying each passage in turn. The left passage leads to what appears to be living quarters, multiple small chambers with furnishings. The center leads deeper underground to a much larger space that I can't fully visualize due to the interference. The right passage connects to something like a laboratory, equipment and storage areas. The central chamber is likely our primary objective, Winterborn suggested. Historical records would be kept in ceremonial spaces rather than utilitarian areas. Naruto nodded agreement, but something about the laboratory passage tugged at his attention, a center sensation that registered as significant to his vampire senses. We'll check the central chamber first, but keep the other passages in mind. There may be relevant information in multiple locations. As they approached the center archway, Naruto noticed additional security feet. Ewers, subtle engravings in the stone threshold that his enhanced vision recognized as activation runes of some kind. He paused, instinct warning against proceeding blindly. There's another security measure here, he stated, kneeling to examine the threshold more closely. Something keyed to recognition patterns. Winterborn moved forward, producing a small device from his equipment pack. The instrument emitted a soft blue light as he scanned the threshold. Sophisticated blood recognition barrier, he confirmed. It won't just open for any vampire, it's calibrated for specific bloodlines. Like a Kekkei Genkei restriction, Hinata observed, connecting the unfamiliar technology to more familiar shinobi concepts. Precisely, Winterborn agreed, and given the age and significance of this installation, likely restricted to noble bloodlines only. Again, all eyes turned to Naruto. The implication was clear: if Alucard's bloodline was recognized by the security system, it would provide further confirmation of his historical connection to this world. Without waiting for the formal request, Naruto drew his kunai again, reopening the partially healed cut on his palm. As blood welled, he knelt and pressed his hand directly to the center of the threshold, allowing the liquid to seep into the nearly invisible channels carved into the stone. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The engravings illuminated with a crimson glow that spread outward like a living network, climbing the archway and continuing along the walls of the passage beyond. A low humming filled the air, vibrating at a frequency that resonated with something deep within Naruto's transformed being. Recognition confirmed, Winterborn stated, his instrument displaying readings he studied with professional detachment. Highest clearance level. Interesting. What does that mean exactly? Naruto asked, rising to his feet as the last of the engravings illuminated. It means, Seras explained quietly, that this installation recognizes you as royalty among vampires. Not merely noble blood, but ruling blood. The distinction might have seemed like mere semantics, but Naruto understood the significance. Each confirmation of his connection to Alucard, to vampire hierarchy and history, represented another thread binding him to an identity he still struggled to reconcile with his own. Without further discussion, they proceeded through the now activated archway, following the illuminated passage as it curved gently downward. The walls here bore more elaborate decorations, not just symbolic script, but actual murals depicting scenes that became increasingly detailed as they progressed. Hinata moved closer to one particularly vivid section, her Byakugan active as she studied the imagery. These appear to depict some form of war, she observed. Look, these figures here are clearly early shinobi, based on their weapons and attire. They're fighting alongside these other figures, who must represent vampires based on the distinctive physical characteristics. Naruto examined the mural more closely. The scene did indeed show what appeared to be an alliance between early shinobi clans and vampire nobility. facing some common enemy depicted as shadowy figures with disturbing, non-human proportions. The first Shadow War, Winterborn identified, his tone suggesting recitation of established history. Approximately 8 centuries ago, vampire nobles allied with emerging shinobi clans against an invasion of entities known as the Hollow Ones, extra-dimensional beings that fed on both life energy and blood. The alliance was successful but short-lived. This isn't in any historical record I've studied, Hinata stated, her academic interest evident beneath professional composure. Most supernatural elements were systematically removed from official histories during the formation of the hidden villages, Winterborn explained. Part of a broader effort to establish shinobi autonomy from older power structures, including vampire courts that had previously held significant influence. The casual revelation of such fundamental historical revision would normally have triggered professional skepticism. But the evidence surrounded them in vivid detail, an underground complex predating the hidden villages, filled with records of events deliberately erased from official memory. So, the first Hokage's unification wasn't just about bringing shinobi clans together, Naruto concluded, connecting historical fragments with new context. It was also about breaking ties with supernatural powers that had previously held influence. Precisely, Winterborn confirmed, though not without considerable resistance. Several early conflicts attributed to standard political tensions were situally proxy wars between shinobi villages and vampire courts attempting to maintain control. The information added layers of complexity to shinobi history that Naruto had never considered. If vampire influence had been so significant, how much of what he'd learned about his world's past was incomplete or deliberately falsified? Before he could pursue this line of questioning, they emerged from the curved passage into a vast circular chamber that drew all attention. The space was enormous, easily 100 meters in diameter, with a dome ceiling rising at least 30 meters above the floor. The entire surface of the dome was covered in an elaborate mural depicting what appeared to be a cosmic map: stars, planets, and other celestial bodies arranged in unfamiliar patterns, with lines connecting certain configurations in meaningful but incomprehensible ways. The chamber's walls were lined with recessed alcoves containing preserved scrolls, books, and what appeared to be storage devices of unfamiliar design. At regular intervals, life-sized statues depicted figures in various historical attire, their features suggesting both human and vampire subjects captured in stone with extraordinary detail. Most impressive, however, was the chamber's center. A raised circular platform approximately 20 meters across contained what could only be described as a three-dimensional historical record. Holographic images floating above specialized projection devices, showing scenes from different historical periods in ghostly detail. The images shifted slowly, changing from one historical tableau to another in a continuous cycle that appeared to span centuries of events. A remembrance chamber, Seras breathed, awe evident in her voice. I've only heard of these in legend. A complete historical record preserved through vampire memory capture technology. Is that what I think it is? Naruto asked, pointing to a familiar figure that had appeared in the shifting images, a tall man in distinctive red coat and wide-brimmed hat, standing among what appeared to be early shinobi leadership during some form of ceremonial gathering. Yes, Seras confirmed quietly. That's Alucard, here, in this world, centuries ago. The confirmation landed with physical impact. Theoretical connections between his reincarnated soul and this world solidified into concrete historical reality. Alucard had indeed visited the shinobi nations, had participated in significant events, had established connections that perhaps explained why his soul had found rebirth here specifically. The memorial statues include major figures from both worlds, Winterborn observed, moving along the chamber's perimeter to study the stone figures more closely. Historical vampires alongside early shinobi clan leaders. Evidence of much closer integration than our records suggested. Hinata had moved to examine the stored documents, her methodical approach reflecting scientific training beyond standard shinobi education. These preservation methods are remarkable, she commented. Some of these scrolls must be centuries old, yet they remain intact down to the molecular level. As his companions explored the chamber's contents, Naruto found himself drawn inexorably toward the central platform. The holographic images called to him on levels beyond conscious thought, recognition humming through his S-formed being like a tuning fork finding its perfect resonance. He stepped onto the platform, and the effect was immediate. The projected images froze, then reorganized themselves, focusing on one specific historical period. New scenes materialized, battles featuring the red-coated figure, diplomatic meetings with early shinobi leaders, and most significantly, a ceremony of some kind where blood was exchanged between Alucard and representatives from what appeared to be early Senju and Uchiha clans. Blood Covenant, Seras identified, moving to stand beside Naruto on the platform. Similar to the arrangement with Hellsing in our original world, but adapted for this world's power structures. A three-way covenant, Winterborn elaborated, joining them with professional curiosity overriding his usual reserve. Binding Alucard to both Senju and Uchiha leadership, the precursors to what would eventually become Konoha's founding clans. The revelation stunned Naruto into momentary silence. If accurate, it suggested his connection to Konoha ran deeper than anyone had realized, not just through his parents and his status as Jinchuriki, but through an ancient blood covenant established centuries before his birth. That covenant would have dissolved with Alucard's departure from this world, Winterborn continued thoughtfully. Unless provisions were made for continuity through reincarnation cycles. Were such provisions possible? Hinata asked, her academic curiosity evident. Theoretically, yes, Seras replied. Blood covenants exist partially in metaphysical dimensions that transcend conventional space-time limitations. If properly structured, they could remain dormant until conditions for reactivation were met. Such as the reincarnation of one participant, Naruto concluded. The implications settling with uncomfortable weight, which might explain why I've always felt such strong connection to Konoha specifically. The observation created momentary silence as everyone absorbed its significance. If Naruto's lifelong dedication to the village stemmed partially from an ancient covenant established by his previous incarnation, how much of his identity, his choices, his values, his dreams, had been truly his own? Before anyone could pursue this disturbing line of thought, the holographic display shifted again, responding to Naruto's presence on the platform. EU images formed. More recent historical periods showing vampire representatives observing key moments in shinobi history from the shadows. The founding of Konoha, the First Shinobi World War, the Kyuubi attack 17 years earlier. Naruto froze, attention riveted on this last scene. The image showed the Nine Tails rampaging at Konoha's borders, but with a critical difference from historical AC. Counts, shadowy figures surrounded the demon fox, appearing to direct or influence its movements through some form of ritual. That's not how it happened, he stated flatly, though doubt colored his certainty. The official history of the Nine Tails attack included no mention of outside manipulation beyond the mysterious masked man some reports had mentioned. Memory preservation technology doesn't fabricate. Winterborn replied carefully. It captures events as witnessed by vampire observers. If this scene is included in the permanent record, it was witnessed firsthand by someone with recording access to this chamber. The implication struck with devastating force. If vampire entities had been involved in the Nine Tails attack, had perhaps even helped orchestrate it, then everything Naruto had believed about that night, about his parents' sacrifice, about his burden as Jinchuriki, existed within a context he'd never known. Why would vampires target Konoha specifically? He demanded, anger flaring beneath the shock. What possible motive? The Covenant, Hinata interrupted, her analytical mind making connections faster than the others. If a blood covenant existed between Alucard and the founding clans, and if provisions for reincarnation were included, then vampire factions opposed to Alucard's influence would have significant motivation to disrupt potential reincarnation patterns. The Jinchuriki seal, Seras added, following the logical progression. It's fundamentally a soul-binding technique. If applied to an infant with specific spiritual characteristics, it could potentially override or suppress a reincarnation pattern that might otherwise manifest naturally. Winterborn finished, professional detachment giving way to genuine concern. Which means, Naruto cut in, voice dangerously calm, that I may have been selected as the Nine Tails Jinchuriki specifically because I already carried Alucard's reincarnated soul. The seal wasn't just containing the fox, it was suppressing my vampire nature. The theory explained too much to dismiss. His unusual healing abilities even beyond Jinchuriki norms, his excessive chakra reserves, the straw NGE dreams he'd occasionally experienced throughout childhood that had been attributed to Ninetales' influence but might actually have been fragmented memories of another life. This is speculation, Winterbourne cautioned. Though his tone lacked conviction. Historical records, even preserved through vampire technology, require proper interpretation. There's one way to confirm certain elements, Hinata suggested quietly. She reached for one of the vials at her waist, a small crystal container filled with clear liquid. If you'll permit me, Naruto-kun. The honorific slipped out, a brief return to their earlier familiarity that contrasted sharply with her otherwise professional demeanor. Naruto nodded permission, curiosity overriding caution. Hinata unstoppered the vial and approached, her movements precise and deliberate. This is a compound developed through Hyuga research, a reagent that reveals certain metaphysical properties in blood. With a small sample from you, I can potentially identify covenant markers. If they exist. The request was reasonable given their discoveries, though it raised further questions about exactly how long the Hyuga clan had been researching vampire biology. Naruto extended his hand, the cut from earlier already healed thanks to his accelerated regeneration. With practiced efficiency, Hinata made a small, precise incision in his fingertip, collecting several drops of blood in the crystal vial. The liquid inside immediately reacted, swirling, changing color from clear to deep crimson, then separating into distinct layers with varying hues. Her Byakugan activated. Hinata studied the reaction with intense concentration. 3 distinct binding patterns, she reported after several moments of careful observation. The primary seal containing the 9 tails is most prominent. As expected. Beneath that, a secondary pattern consistent with what my clan's research identifies as vampire bloodline markers. And the third, Seras prompted when Hinata hesitated. The third is unusual, she replied carefully. It appears to be a dormant covenant structure, inactive but intact. Based on its configuration, it would indeed connect to founding clan bloodlines. Though modified from its original form, the confirmation landed with finality. Not speculation or theory, but observable fact. Naruto carried within his blood evidence of an ancient covenant binding Alucard to what would become Konoha's founding clans. Can you determine the covenant's specific terms? Winterbourne asked, professional interest momentarily overriding the broader implications. Hinata shook her head slightly. Not from this analysis alone. The structure is visible but not the content. For that, we would need a blood sample from a direct descendant of the original covenant participants, Seras finished. A pure-blooded Senju or Uchiha. The practical impossibility of this requirement was immediately apparent. The Senju clan had dwindled to near extinction, with Tsunade herself representing one of the few remaining direct descendants. The Uchiha had been massacred years earlier, with only Sasuke Uchiha surviving, and his current whereabouts remained unknown following his defection. Tsunade-sama might be willing, Hinata suggested. If the covenant has implications for village security. Perhaps, Naruto acknowledged, though. His thoughts were already racing ahead to broader implications. But first, we need to understand exactly what we've discovered here. If vampire factions were involved in the 9 Tails attack, if my selection as Jinchuriki was connected to Alucard's reincarnation, then current events take on entirely new dimensions. Agreed, Winterbourne stated, his tactical mind clearly processing security implications. This information requires careful handling. The existence of an ancient covenant connecting Captain Uzumaki to Konoha's founding clans has significant political ramifications. As does evidence of vampire manipulation of historical events, Seras added grimly. Particularly events as significant as the 9 Tails attack. Naruto's attention returned to the holographic display, which had frozen on the image of shadowy figures surrounding the rampaging fox. Anger simmered beneath his carefully maintained control, not the hot, impulsive rage of his younger years, but something colder and more focused. If vampire factions had helped orchestrate the attack that killed his parents and burdened his childhood, justice was long overdue. We should document everything, he decided, pushing emotion aside to focus on immediate priorities. Hinata, can you catalog the historical sequences shown in the display? Captain Winterbourne, please examine any technical aspects of the preservati on systems that might help authenticate these records. Seras and I will check the other chambers for corroborating evidence. The decisive leadership seemed to reassure his companions, who moved to implement his directives with professional efficiency. As Naruto prepared to investigate the laboratory passage they'd noted earlier, Hinata approached him once more, her expression suggesting she had something to add privately. "There's something else," she said softly, ensuring the others were out of earshot. "About my blood's properties." Naruto gave her his full attention, noting the slight tension in her posture that suggested personal rather than professional concern. "My father mentioned neutralizing or amplifying effects," she continued, choosing words with careful precision. "What he didn't explain is that these properties appear to be specifically keyed to you." "To me," Naruto repeated, confusion evident. "How is that possible?" "Unknown," Hinata admitted, "but preliminary testing confirmed it. My blood can temporarily suppress your vampire nature, or significantly enhance it, depending on application method. No other Hyuga shows this specific reactivity pattern." The revelation added yet another layer of complexity to an already bewildering situation. Combined with the Covenant discoveries, it suggested connections between Naruto's transformed nature and Konoha's bloodlines that extended far beyond coincidence. "Does your father have a theory about why?" he asked, studying her with newfound curiosity. A faint blush colored Hinata's cheeks, a glimpse of the why girl he remembered beneath the composed professional she'd become. He suggested possible spiritual resonance between certain souls, but declined to elaborate further. "My impression is that he knows more than he's sharing." Naruto considered this carefully. Hiashi Hyuga had always been a calculating figure, protective of clan secrets and political positioning. For him to volunteer Hinata for this mission, to reveal even limited information about her unique blood properties, suggested motivation beyond mere scientific interest. "Thank you for telling me," he said finally. "We'll need to explore this further, but carefully. There are too many factions interested in vampire biology already." Hinata nodded agreement, hesitating briefly before adding, "Whatever we discover, Naruto-kun, Ace, remember that you've always defined yourself through your choices, not your circumstances. That remains true, regardless of past lives or ancient covenants." The simple affirmation touched him unexpectedly. Throughout the awakening process, most had focused on what he was becoming, what powers he might manifest, what dangers he might pose. Few had acknowledged the fundamental question of identity that underlay these external concerns. "Thank you, Hinata," he replied softly. "That helps." With renewed focus, they returned to their investigation, methodically documenting the chamber's contents while processing the paradigm-shifting revelations they'd uncovered. The underground complex had indeed provided context for Naruto's transformation, but context that raised far more questions than it answered. As he examined ancient records and artifacts, one certainty crystallized in Naruto's mind: the awakening of his vampire nature wasn't random cosmic chance or simple reincarnation. It represented the culmination of forces and factions operating across centuries, manipulating events toward objectives still partially obscured. Understanding these objectives, and the players behind them, had become essential not just for his personal journey but for Konoha's security. If vampire factions had helped orchestrate the Nine Tails attack 17 years ago, what might they be planning? Now that Alucard's power had reawakened in the very Jinchuriki created to suppress it. The blood memories flowing through his dreams suddenly took on new significance, not just echoes of another life, but potentially vital intelligence about enemies who had operated in shadows for generations. As the team continued their investigation deep beneath the ancient shrine, Naruto resolved to master these memories, to understand the covenant written in his blood, and to uncover the truth behind the forces that had shaped his existence from before his birth. The journey had only begun. Chapter 3 End. The end. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.